Okay, student, good evening. Let's start with today's session. So this is going to be my second class. Let me write it over here. Always, whenever I'll be going to start my session, first of all, I'll be going to write the class number. So we have already started our academic discussion on Indian polity and constitution. I hope you have revised my last session, and this is going to be our class number 2. So in my last session, I was started with my academic discussion on Indian polity and constitution, and I was started with this particular area. So every session, I will make sure the academic content is going to be go through as per the syllabus that I've already shared with you. Let me show it to you once again. I hope whosoever have joined with me as of now, I have already distributed it to you. I have already asked my team to send you a soft copy related to this particular academic syllabus. This academic syllabus comprises 40 units of Indian polity, and every session of ours are going to be in this manner itself. So this is the syllabus. This is the micro syllabus of Indian polity and constitution. This is something that you have to go through during the course of your preparation. So as per this syllabus, which is, I guess, already there with you, I have already asked my team to distribute the soft copy. I hope आपने print out निकाल लिया होगा और आप इसी के according आप पढ़ रहे हैं. So in my last session, I was started with the concept of constitution. So in my last class, class number 1, I have shared with you what are the basic tenets of constitution. Let me go back to the slides. So in my last session, I have shared with you number 1, basic tenets. Tenet means philosophy, basic philosophy of constitution, basic principle of constitution. I've shared with you related to concept of constitution, very important principles related to constitution, and if I'm not wrong, I have shared with you 10 important principle of constitution. We will dedicate our time to the study of Indian constitution, but first of all we need to study the postulates or academic overview of the word constitution itself, how the constitution has been evolved, what all are the academic area and foundational pillar of constitution. तो पढ़ेंगे इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन को. पहले ये पढ़ना बहुत जरूरी है कि कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन क्या होता है, एंड हंड्रेड्स ऑफ इंपॉर्टेंट वोकेबुलरी, इंपॉर्टेंट वर्ड्स विच आर बीन completely encapsulated with the study of constitution. So I've gone through the word constitution. Apart from that, I have also introduced it to you. What is constitutionalism, importance of constitutionalism, some thinkers which are been associated with the study of constitution I have already shared with you. For example, Plato's idea of constitution, Aristotle ideas of constitution, Cicero ideas of constitution, John Locke idea of constitution is something I have already shared with you. Then in my last class, I have also shared with you what is constitutionalism. Constitutionalism is more important compared to constitution because constitutionalism is one such principle based upon which the constitution is going to get created. Constitutionalism is the philosophy, constitutionalism is the building block based upon which constitution is going to get created. Constitutionalism promotes the idea of zero arbitrary power. It put a complete amount of restraint and checks and balances on the functioning of various institutions. I have shared in details related to it. और कुछ example भी दिए थे, कुछ कई सारे constitutional cases भी आपके साथ share किए थे. And if I'm not wrong, towards the end of my session, I've shared with you the importance of rule of law. What exactly is the purpose behind evidices rule of law? So this is something I've shared with you in my last class, and as per syllabus we are right now sharing with the concept of constitution, unit number 2. So I've shared with you this concept, I've shared with you this concept, theory and meaning of constitution, constitutionalism, rule of law, classification of constitution as fundamental law, something I have already shared with you. Rest all stuff are need to be completed in today's session. So without wasting any time, let's start with today's session, and I'm going to start my today's session on a very important note, on a very important question. Question is, why does a democratic country start writing now Start writing, start making your notes. Why does a democratic country need a rule of law? Why does a democratic country need a rule of law? India is a democracy. Indeed, India is a democracy, and it's a functioning democracy. It is not a democracy limited only onto the paper. It is a functioning democracy, and whenever a local SDM, a local DSP, a local police official, or a higher police official or higher administrative official are not going to follow their duty as per the constitutional values, then you always go to the Supreme Court and you will say, Your Lordship, rule of law is not followed. And if rule of law is not followed, then it is a complete obliteration or it's a complete deterioration of the democratic value. The question ye hai, why does a democratic country need a rule of law? And A.V. Dicey answered it very specifically. Dicey has one apprehension. Dicey को एक चीज का डर था. A.V. Dicey has one specific apprehension, and his apprehension was there are a lot of country which define rights. There are a lot of country which proclaim rights. बहुत सारी country हैं जो rights की बात करती हैं, rights को लिखती भी हैं. There are a lot of country which define rights. There are a lot of country which proclaim rights, but they do not practice those rights. Which means on paper, everything has been written related to the rights of the people, but it has not been implemented on ground. And therefore, as per the wisdom and belief of A.V. Dicey, those countries who talk about right but they do not implement the philosophy of rights are known as those countries which do not have rule of law. And those countries can only be democratic country on paper, but in reality, they can be any totalitarian country or any dictatorship country. So why do we need a rule of law? A very important question. Why do we need a rule of law? So answer to this particular question is, we need to have a rule of law to make sure arbitrary power of any institution is not tolerated. Whether it is judiciary, whether it is executive, whether it is legislature, if a country abide by the principle of rule of law, then they should always have their limit. They should work within the limit. There should not be uncontrolled power. There should not be any arbitrary power. So first of all, if I'm going to use the term कि क्यों जरूरी है rule of law, so please answer your question in this manner, that any democratic country is going to be run by institution. After all, who run the democratic country? Is Prime Minister run the democratic country? Is CM run the democratic country? Answer is no. Prime Minister and CM work as an institution, and therefore it's the institution which run the democratic country, and institution should be within their limit. They should not cross their limit, and therefore we need a rule of law. So rule of law for a democratic country means arbitrary power of any institution is not at all tolerated, and legal protection for certain human rights should be given or should be maintained. Legal protection for certain human rights should be given, should be maintained. Because one of the most important hallmark of any democratic country is human rights are going to get protected, human values are going to get protected. What do we mean by human right? This is something we'll be going to read tomorrow. But as of now, for the fundamental principle of learning, rule of law is very essential for democratic country, ताकि किसी institution का misuse ना हो, और साथ ही साथ मेरे जो और आपके जो बेसिक ह्यूमन राइट्स है, दे नीड टू बी वेल प्रोटेक्टेड, दे नीड टू बी वेल गार्डेड. Now comes a very important terminology that I want to share with you. First of all, student, listen to this part very carefully. Rule of law does not mean rule according to law. A lot of people have a misconception. Sir, these are the 10 important laws, and I am the SDM, I am the DSP of this particular area, and whatever step that I am taking as per this law itself. No, this is not rule of law. Rule of law does not mean rule according to law. Rule of law actually means law has been created which is unfair, which is unreasonable, and which is unfair, which is reasonable. It is definitely not tolerating any unreasonability. Rule of law actually means law has been created by a degree of fairness, by a degree of reasonability, and there is no arbitrary power given to any institution. So please understand, rule of law does not mean rule only according to law. Rule of law actually means law has been created with the purpose of fairness, justness, and reasonability. What a powerful line for each and every one of us to understand. Let me write this particular line as well, and it's very essential for your note-making process. So, a very important point for the understanding of Indian Constitution. And please understand one very important point. When you are reading Constitution, when you are just taking the initial step of reading Constitution, you need to understand little bit of language of law, little bit of language of political science and sociology, little bit of language of criminal justice system. All these are going to get well integrated into the understanding of Indian Constitution. So rule of law does not mean rule according to, please write this important line, rule according to statutory law. I hope you people are making your notes as I am writing it to you. Rule of law does not mean rule according to statutory law. In fact, it means a rule or law being created, a rule or law being created with a degree of fairness, justness, and reasonability. A very powerful line. Whenever you are going to read A.V. Dicey's theory of law, theory of rule of law, you will come across this important point. So what do we mean by rule of law? रूल ऑफ लॉ का मतलब ये नहीं कि जो लिखा है सर वही तो फॉलो कर रहे हैं. अरे लिखा जो गया है वो भी फेयर होना चाहिए. So just because SDM is saying that whatever that I am implementing as per the limited power of mind, whatever that I am implementing is being written in law, so even the written words can be corrupt. So when lawmakers, your MLA and MP who are sitting in the parliament and legislative assemblies, when they are making law, even they should abide by the principle of rule of law. So rule of law does not mean कि law बनाना है. Rule of law does not mean कि law के अकॉर्डिंग चलना है. Rule of law का मतलब होता है law के अकॉर्डिंग चलना भी है और law बनाने से पहले we need to run according to the law, and before we create the law, law should be fair, law should be just, law should be reasonable, and I should write one very important point, law should be non-discriminatory. It should not be discriminatory, it should be non-discriminatory. This is the hallmark of democracy. So if a country which is proclaiming herself to be a democratic country, they should abide by the principle of rule of law, because rule of law belongs to one very important parameter. Rule of law has never been associated with only creation of law. Rule of law is primarily associated with one fundamental principle, and that fundamental principle is when laws are going to get created, they will be non-discriminatory, they will be reasonable, they will be just, they will be fair. Of course, law need to be legal. Because if MLAs and MPs are going to create the law, they should follow the process as been mentioned in the Constitution. But there is something not been mentioned in the Constitution, which is constitutionalism. So one very important point is, student, there is a close relationship. There is indeed a very close relationship between constitutionalism and rule of law. So please write this in your notebook. Whenever you'll be going to get the opportunity to write the mains answer, these type of vocabulary will really matter a lot. We still haven't gone through the study of Indian Constitution. We will study preamble, we will study different article, fundamental right and all those things. But your learning is going to be truly different at that particular period of time once you are comfortable with these special terminologies. So constitutionalism and rule of law has a close connection. It has a close connection. Of course, rule of law is a very wider term that has been associated in the legal terminology, and indeed it has been well associated with the constitutionalism. In my last class, what I've told you, constitutionalism means there should be no unrestricted power. There should be limitation of the power. Similarly, over here, rule of law does not mean unrestricted power given to the local magistrate. Rule of law actually means when policy makers and rule makers of our country are going to create the law, they should abide by these principles. They should pass the litmus test of these principles. If they are not going to follow these principles, it means they are playing with the purpose of law creation policy itself. So again, a very important term which I have to associate it over here. So I hope you are in a better position to answer this question. Why does a democratic country need rule of law? To make sure arbitrary power of institution is not going to be there. And of course, this particular terminology which I have shared with you, it is not the creation of law which really matter. It is not the following the purpose of law which really matter. It is actually following that particular objective which will make sure law are going to be reasonable, just and non-discriminatory in nature. तो केवल law बनाना policy makers का काम नहीं है. केवल कानून बनाना MLA MPs का काम नहीं है. Their main purpose is to abide by the principle of rule of law rather than only making law. Therefore, in my previous session on Saturday, I've used the term very significantly in front of you. We need to have a rule of law. We need not to have a rule of men, because if rule of men is going to be there, it may be possible that they will become unfair. They will become unjust. They will become unreasonable, and they may be going to become discriminatory in nature. That's a very powerful line which we need to associate with it. Few examples. There are few examples in Indian Constitution which can be associated with rule of law? Are there any example? Are there any close example? Are there any Supreme Court cases which actually gives a close connection between constitution and rule of law? Indeed, there are. For example, Article 14. So what is Article 14? Article 14 says right to equality. Article 14 says right to equality. I will give you in detailed discussion of right to equality when we are going to look into fundamental rights. But as of now, we all know Article 14 is right to equality. But in order to promote right to equality, a state can take certain decisions. A state can take certain decision. Certain decision for what? Certain decision to promote what? Certain decision to promote equality. But whenever a state take certain decision to create the basic principle of equality, they should always abide by the principle of rule of law. It's a very essential terminology. Of course, when I use the term equality, we all know, student, equality is slightly a topic of mirage. जितना नजदीक जाएंगे उतना दूर होती हुई नजर आएगी. And equality is considered to be a concept which is definitely very difficult for any country to have it completely. Like your hand, where 5 fingers are there, and all fingers are important, but they all have different shape, they all have different purposes altogether, but they all are very important to have a close fist. Similarly, student, in our society there are so many sections, so we cannot have a formal equality, but we can have a proportional equality. And in order to have a proportional equality, government can create certain law, government can create certain mechanism, government can create certain exceptional philosophy, scholarship, reservation, whatever they want to create. But whenever they are going to create certain principles in order to promote right to equality, they should always abide by one principle, which is a state can take certain decision to promote equality, but it should always abide by the principle of rule of law. Let me give you a very important case right now. A very, very important case which you will be going to learn a lot of time in our classes, Bachchan Singh Doctrine. So what is Bachchan Singh Doctrine? Bachchan Singh versus State of Punjab. It is related to capital punishment. It is related to capital punishment. It is related to Mrityu Dand, capital punishment. So in the Bachchan Singh Doctrine, Supreme Court said categorically that even if a person has committed a very serious offense or a very dreaded crime, हमने आंखों से देखा है crime commit करते हुए, हमने अजमल कसाब को भी देखा है आंखों से क्राइम कमिट करते हुए, जेनोसाइड करते हुए, टेररिज्म करते हुए. एंड सिमिलरली इवन इफ अ ड्रेडेड क्रिमिनल हैव बीन कॉट रेड हैंडेड, he should be hanged, he should be given a punishment, but that hanging and that punishment should also be according to law. You cannot have arbitrary purpose कि हाँ हाँ कल ही तो पकड़ा है इसको, अब एक काम करो, कल पकड़ा हमने देखा इसको लटका देते फांसी में. No, there need to be certain purposes, there need to be certain mechanism, there need to be certain processes that need to be followed. Therefore, in Supreme Court Bachchan Singh doctrine case, Supreme Court used this terminology very appropriately, which I would like you to write. So in the year 1982, in Bachchan Singh doctrine or Bachchan Singh case itself, not exactly Bachchan Singh doctrine. Bachchan Singh doctrine is primarily related to basically capital punishment itself. So you should write Bachchan Singh case itself. So in the Bachchan Singh case, Supreme Court used this terminology specifically, which says rule of law should be followed at every stage. Rule of law should be followed at every stage, and it should not be, repetitive word, and it should not be arbitrary and unreasonable. I don't have too much space over there, so I'm writing in short form. I don't have too much space over here, so I'm writing in short form. I hope students are writing it as it is. So one very important point is rule of law should be followed at every stage, and it should not be arbitrary and reasonable. But the major question is, who will decide whether the process is arbitrary or not? Who will decide whether the process is reasonable and not? So under this situation, student, in the Bachchan Singh case, Supreme Court had said, in order to have a rule of law, we need to have a judicial review. In order to have a rule of law, we need to have a judicial review. So one very important parameter of having checks and balances is to have a judicial review. Please write one statement. I'm not going to write it over here. Please write one statement. Write it. It is necessary to have a judicial review. It is necessary to have a judicial review. It is necessary to have a judicial review to establish rule of law in a country. To establish rule of law in a country, so that judiciary can examine, constitutionality of a law. Constitutionality of a law, so that judiciary can examine constitutionality of a law, and steps taken by executive, So what a beautiful depiction over here, student. In Bachchan Singh case is related to capital punishment. Bachchan Singh case is related to one of the most important case, which is related to the constitutional principles which are very much there in under Article 21. We will definitely going to read more in details later on when we read fundamental right. But as of now, I'm teaching you rule of law. So how rule of law is going to get established? Of course, SDM ढंग से काम करे, लॉ के अकॉर्डिंग काम करे, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के अकॉर्डिंग काम करे, ये सब तो बोलने में अच्छा लगता है. बट अगर एसडीएम गलत तरीके से काम करे, एमएलए गलत तरीके से काम करे, तो कौन होगा उनको चेक करने के लिए? देयरफॉर इन बच्चन सिंह केस, सुप्रीम कोर्ट कैटेगोरिकली मेंशन दैट वी नीड टू हैव अ रूल ऑफ लॉ in order to make India a functioning democracy. In order to make India a functioning democracy, we need to have a rule of law. Rule of law should be followed at every stage. It should not be arbitrary. It should not be unreasonable, which means whenever government is going to take certain step, it should not be arbitrary. It should not be unreasonable. And one very important point is rule of law can be established with the help of a judicial review. Judicial review of what? Judicial review to make sure executive is taking decision as per the principles of rule of law. legislatures are creating law as per the principles of rule of law. और अभी मैंने आपको एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट लाइन बताई है, उसी का रिपीटिशन है यहां पर, विच इज रूल ऑफ लॉ डज नॉट मीन रूल अकॉर्डिंग टू स्टैट्यूटरी लॉ. स्टैट्यूटरी लॉ का मतलब होता है स्टूडेंट वो लॉ जिसको पार्लियामेंट ने बनाया है, वो लॉ जिसको एग्जीक्यूटिव इंप्लीमेंट कर रहा है, पार्लियामेंट या लेजिस्लेचर ने बनाया है. स्टैट्यूट लॉ मेड बाय अ लेजिस्लेचर. सो rule of law does not mean rule according to statutory law. In fact, it means a rule or law that has been created with a degree of all these four important principles. So, one very important parameter is, student, judiciary is there to make sure there is going to be implementation of rule of law. So, if somebody going to ask you a very important question, if somebody is going to raise this question, if I'm asking this question to you, why judiciary is very important? Why judiciary is very, very important? So always write your answer in this manner. Judiciary is always very important to make sure principle of constitutionalism and principles of rule of law are going to be firmly intact. I'll repeat. Judiciary is very important to make sure that the principle of constitutionalism and principles of rule of law are going to be firmly intact. अगर ये दो चीजें इस देश में रहेंगी, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन बनाने के पीछे की जो फिलॉसफी है, विच इज कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनलिज्म, विच मीन्स नो आर्बिट्ररी पावर फॉर एनीवन इंक्लूडिंग पीएम, प्रेसिडेंट और एनीवन, एंड इंस्टीट्यूशन शुड वर्क विद इन देयर लिमिट. So if constitutionalism principle is going to be followed, and based upon which, if law has been created and they have been created with the purpose of rule of law and are being implemented on ground with the principle of rule of law, then this country will have democracy till eternity. आने वाले हजारों साल तक democracy रहेगी if we'll be going to abide by the principle of rule of law and constitutionalism. But who will ensure rule of law in our country? The only party which will ensure rule of law, which will make sure that the rule of law is going to be there in every nook and corner of this country, it has to be judiciary, because judiciary has a power of doing the judicial review of various steps taken by the government and its agencies. So again, a very important line, student, which we have to understand. Please understand, when Avid IC has written rule of law, he written rule of law with some very expressive purposes, and his expressive purposes was 2 or 3 things. Number 1, he believed कि है ना लॉ की सुप्रीमेसी होनी चाहिए. लॉ में जो लिखा है और लॉ को लिखने के पीछे जो ऑब्जेक्टिव रहे हैं वो पूरी तरीके से इंप्लीमेंट होने चाहिए. दैट कैन ओनली बी पॉसिबल व्हेन बोथ द लॉ एंड द पर्पस ऑफ द लॉ आर गोइंग टू गेट क्वाइट क्लियर टू द पीपल. So always he believe in one manner that there are a lot of country which proclaim herself to be democracy, but they are not democracy in reality. They are only democracy when it comes to on paper. In order to become a functioning democracy means democracy भी है और वो ground पे implement होते हुए दिख भी रहा है. In order to have a functioning democracy, it's very essential to have a rule of law and constitutionalism. And in order to make sure rule of law and constitutionalism is going to be there, we need to have a judicial review. Judiciary should abide by the principle of this 2 important parameter, rule of law as well as constitutionalism. Now, when we are going to do the judiciary, you will definitely going to learn more about it. You must be wondering, sir, why are you teaching this concept initially at this stage itself? The answer to this question is, it will become more easier for us to read judiciary after then. Because when we'll be going to look into the technical details of Article 124 and Article 147, when we're going to look into important cases like Minerva Mill and Menka Gandhi case, this language become more easier for us to understand. फिर जब मैं वहाँ पर बोलूँगा कि rule of law को implement करना चाहिए, तो मुझे explain नहीं करना पड़ेगा what is rule of law, because you have already gone through it. So it's a very important definition that we have to look into it. Moving on, next concept is, student, evolution of the concept of constitution. So in my previous class, I have gone through the constitution as a technical definition. Now let us look into evolution of concept of constitution. So constitution as a concept is quite new, but looking into the 5,000-year-old of human history, 5,000-year-old of human history is all about that history when human get capitalized into certain colonies, into certain kingdoms, into certain civilization, and then later on we turn out to be modern day countries. तो पिछले 5000 सालों में कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन का एवोल्यूशन कैसे हुआ है. कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन इज क्वाइट अ न्यू टर्मिनोलॉजी इन द स्टडी ऑफ फील्ड ऑफ लीगल थ्योरीज or in the study of field of law. Constitution is considered to be quite a modern concept, but कहने को modern concept है, but it had its genesis in the ancient time itself. So constitution as a principle is been evolving since millennia. Please write along with me. As a concept, it has been evolving since millennia, and it is an ongoing process. It has not been stopped. It is ongoing process. And one more important point, earlier constitution were informal customs. They were informal custom, tradition. जो लोगों ने कह दिया, जो कबीले के सरदार ने कह दिया, उसको फॉलो करना चालू कर दिया. सो अर्लियर कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन वॉज मोर और लेस रिलेटेड टू इनफॉर्मल कस्टम. इट लेटर ऑन टर्न आउट टू बी अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट फ्रेमवर्क ऑफ रिटन डॉक्यूमेंट. Modern day constitutions are all written, but earlier they were not written. They were more or less depend upon certain type of custom, certain type of tradition, certain type of religious belief. Even a religious belief that you are having it based upon which you are functioning, it is also a type of constitution. After all, हमारे घरों में जो marriages होती हैं, मैरिजेस पे हम कोई ट्रेडिशन फॉलो करते हैं. ट्रेडिशन एक तरीके के रूल्स होते हैं, और रूल्स को फॉलो करना ही तो एक तरीके का कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन प्रिंसिपल है. So earlier, when human civilization got its initially fundamental structure status 5000 year old, if you are going to look into the history of the world, there are 6 important civilizations. So you have the Mesopotamian civilization, Egypt civilization, Indian civilization, Chinese civilization, ancient Greece and ancient Rome. These are the 6 important civilizations of the world. So if we are going to look into the historical aspect of the 6 ancient civilization, we can come across this statement very fruitfully, that constitution as a concept has been evolving since millennia. It's an ongoing process. Earlier it was more or less considered to be a process of informal customs, informal traditions. Now it has been converted into a written document completely, like American Constitution, Canadian Constitution, Australian Constitution, or even Indian Constitution, which are considered to be more or less written one. Now, we have to look into the larger picture, how the concept of constitution been evolved. So first of all, constitution as a principle been evolved during ancient times. During ancient times. Now there are no specific time period for it, but when I'll be going to use the word ancient time, it should be at least 5500 before Christian era to at least 500 after, let me write, Christian era. So it's already a period of 1000 years. So 500 years before Christian era, 500 years of Christian era after that itself. So in this 1000-year period, student, there was no written constitution. Constitution was not even a word to be discussed. It was more about rules. So during the ancient time, constitution was more about rules. It was more about tradition. It was more about custom. It was more about norms. It was more about norms. Norms is basically, norms एक sociology में एक शब्द होता है, which we commonly acclaim or which we commonly consider it to be that particular word, which is more or less related to the acceptable social behavior. So certain social behavior, certain custom, certain tradition, certain rules, there was not a written constitution. Constitution as a matter of study was not even present at that particular period of time. At that particular period of time, it was all about rules, rules of kingdom, rules of trade, rules of war, and all these conditions were considered to be the parameter at that particular period of time. Of course, in ancient time itself, democracy was going through its nascent stages. It was going through a period of complete transition, and that particular period of time, ancient times, rules, tradition, custom, norms was there. उन्हीं को constitution माना जाता था. Constitution was not considered to be a effective matter of study of subject. So this was the particular condition. Let me give you one very good example related to it. The good example of ancient time constitution based upon rules, tradition and custom was Code of Hammurabi. Please write. Code of Hammurabi. It is related to the Mesopotamian civilization. When you are going to read history, you will definitely going to learn more about Mesopotamian civilization. So Mesopotamian civilization is more or less related to the western part, Western Asia, and it is more or less related to near the river of Euphrates and Tigris. Two of the most important rivers in Western Asian part of the world is, student, the Euphrates River and the Tigris River. If I'm not wrong, they've been related to Syria and Iraq. And this is where your whole Mesopotamian civilization got its new identity. So Mesopotamian civilization में Code of Hammurabi होता था. Code of Hammurabi is more or less related to trade, more or less related to the behavior, और थोड़ा सा violent भी था, eye for eye, मतलब कि आंख आपने किसी की फोड़ी है तो आपको दूसरे की आंख को फोड़ के बदला पूरा करना पड़ेगा. It was tit for tat at that particular period of time. We all know we are not living in this type of jungle era. We are not living in this type of law where eye for eye is making every part of our society blind. No, but at that particular period of time, it was considered to be more or less legal. So in ancient time, there was no constitution. It was more or less rules, tradition, custom, norms. One of the example is Code of Hammurabi. One more example that I can give it to you is Kautilya Arthashastra. So Kautilya Arthashastra in Indian context was an advisor in Chandragupta Maurya regime. And Kautilya Arthashastra is considered to be the foundational principle of Indian constitution belief. So when we use the term constitutionalism, so constitutionalism is the basic philosophy based upon which the constitutional values are going to be there. So certain basic philosophies was very much there in the Kautilya administrative culture, Kautilya administrative purposes, which he has given in a very formative way in its magnum opus Arthashastra. I hope I need not to explain it to you. Arthashastra में बताया गया है how bureaucracy will work, how foreign policy will work, what are going to be the duty of a state, what are going to be the duty of citizen, what are going to be the duty of soldiers. Every single walk of life being well described in Kautilya Arthashastra. Kautilya Arthashastra was also related to rules, was also related to tradition, custom, norms, behavior of the king and of the subject. And therefore, student, I should rather say during the ancient time, Kautilya Arthashastra plays a very vital role which has its connection in the modern day constitution itself. Similarly, student, in Indian context, one more important point is there, which is Dharma Shastra. कभी सुना होगा ये शब्द धर्म शास्त्र, or you may have heard Dharma Sutra. Your history faculty will teach you importance of Dharma Shastra and Dharma Sutra. So when I use the term Dharma Shastra and Dharma Sutra, they are truly different terminology, each and everything. Both of them are slightly different. Both these Dharma Shastra and Dharma Sutra are related to the way of life, are related to the purposes of life, are related to the Vedic teaching as well. Both these things, Dharma Shastra and Dharma Sutra, they actually describe the Vedic teachings, what all principles were there in Indian Vedas, and apart from that, they also describe how every class, community and different type of caste actually behave in a society. So whenever I use the term rule, whether it is being depicted in Code of Hammurabi, whether it is depicted in Kautilya Arthashastra, or whether it is being depicted in Dharma Shastra or Dharma Sutra, it is all related to certain rules. और यही rules तो आगे चलकर modern day written constitution बन गए. So in ancient time, student, constitution got its genesis during the period of Code of Hammurabi, and of course from the Indian context, Kautilya Arthashastra, and of course Manu Smriti, Yagyavalkya Smriti, different type of Dharma Shastra plays a very important role. I do not want to get into the detail what do we mean by Dharma Shastra and Dharma Sutra. This is something you'll be going to read more in your history class. But as of now, please understand Constitution is a modern day concept, but it has its genesis during the ancient time itself. And we all know, as living beings get evolved over a period of time, so does the constitution. So during the ancient time, these three are the three most important things to be associated with the evolution of constitution. Now let us talk about medieval times. How constitution has been evolved. Let me write over here. ये आपको नहीं लिखना है, आप तो ऑलरेडी हेडलाइन बना चुके हो. So in the evolution of constitution, medieval times plays a very important role, because during the medieval time, one significant event took place which actually considered to be the foundational principle of constitution. I have already shared with you in my last class, which is known as Magna Carta, the Treaty of Magna Carta. So the Treaty of Magna Carta, which makes sure kings are not going to be having absolute power. Even kings are subjected to certain provisions. They are not going to enjoy absolute power at all. I've already described you the historical points or the historical scenario which leads towards the Magna Carta. During that particular period of time in Britain, somewhere around the 11th, 12th century, it was quite a feudal system where most of the people are subjects, and they are being governed by kings, they are being governed by popes, they are being governed by other different monarchs. And of course, feudal system was very popular. So there was a huge amount of uprising. Due to that particular uprising, Magna Carta took place, where king decided himself that monarchies are not going to have absolute power, there is going to be certain restrictions. So those restrictions leads towards the philosophical principles of Magna Carta. So Magna Carta plays a very important role, which primarily means institution, any institution which is governing us need not to have absolute power. There need to be certain checks, there need to be certain balances, because absolute power is going to corrupt certain people absolutely. So Magna Carta plays a very important role. तो वो उसका पूरा एक हिस्टोरिकल एविडेंसेस है मैग्ना कार्टा में. रॉयल पावर को रेस्ट्रिक्ट किया गया, टैक्सेशन को रिफॉर्म किया गया. सो दोज थिंग्स आर नॉट वेरी एसेंशियल फॉर अवर लर्निंग इन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, बट ऑलवेज रिमेंबर स्टूडेंट, इफ यू आर गोइंग टू डिग deeper into the study of constitution, you will realize principles of Magna Carta plays a very important role in the initial chapters of the foundational pillar of constitution itself. So during the medieval times, Magna Carta plays a very important role. Of course, religiously, Mohammedan law or the law of Medina or the teachings of Prophet Muhammad also played a very important role, because we all know there are total more than 57 Islamic countries in the world, and all these Islamic countries are actually being governed by the Islamic law, by the teachings of Prophet Muhammad. So whatever teachings which were there given by the Prophet Muhammad, it ultimately turned out to be the constitutional principle of Islamic country as well. So I'm not writing it, but for your overall understanding, Prophet Muhammad ने जो teachings दिखाई, जो teachings समझाई, उन टीचिंग्स को इंक्लूड करके भी एक इस्लामिक लॉ बनने चालू हुए. वही इस्लामिक लॉ बेसिकली इस्लामिक कंट्रीज के कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल प्रिंसिपल बन गए. So during the medieval time, religion plays a very important role. But beyond that, one of the most hallmark event in the medieval times for the study of constitution is Magna Carta. Moving on, pre-modern time. Pre-modern time, modern era आने से पहले, pre-modern time, which means the time period between the 16th century to almost the 18th century, from 1500 to 1800. So during the pre-modern time, a lot of significant event took place which leads towards the creation of constitutional values. And one of the most important one is enlightenment. Very important event, enlightenment. Look student, when you are going to read the world history, apart from that, when you are going to read the history, and in my topic as well, I'll be going to include so many important names in the study of constitution. For example, John Locke, for example, Rousseau, for example, theory given by Auguste Comte. All these people are basically responsible for the social contract theory, basically responsible for the new understanding of how a state should be governed and how there should be a relationship between state and citizen. Let me give you a rough background. तो हुआ क्या स्टूडेंट, 12th सेंचुरी 13th सेंचुरी मैग्ना कार्टा के बाद ना लोग बातें करने लगे दैट देयर शुड बी मोर रिस्पेक्ट फॉर इंडिविजुअल लिबर्टीज. We should give a lot of respect for individual liberties. Individual liberty means liberty of an individual. We should not have a state, we should not have a monarchy which is going to have complete command, and they should not have a tie-up cover on our neck. We need to be having freedom, and that freedom is been well included in the concept of enlightenment. Enlightenment का जो era था, it leads towards the scientific evidence. It leads towards asking question. It leads towards the authority, challenging the authority of church. So in the times of student 1500 to 1800, over a period of almost 300-400 years, at that particular period of time, church was holding unbelievable amount of power. Church का मतलब समझ रहे हो? Church का मतलब है वहां पर ना religion का बहुत ज्यादा रूल था. So religion was dominating at that particular period of time. तो जो रिलीजन को चलाने वाले जो पादरी थे, जो वहाँ पे प्रीस्ट थे, वो जो कहते थे लोग मानने लगते थे. एंड समटाइम्स इट इज़ हाईली ऑब्नॉक्शियस, समटाइम्स इट इज़ हाईली इलॉजिकल. बट आफ्टर द एविडेंसेस ऑफ साइंटिफिक एक्सपेरिमेंट, साइंस बहुत तेजी से प्रोग्रेस करने लगा था. यू लुक एट पीपल लाइक गलीलियो, पीपल लाइक कॉपरनिकस, पीपल लाइक न्यूटन, they all have raised the scientific acquaintanceship. So scientific intellectual capacity of the people of Europe been increasing, and once it has been increasing, they've got enlightened. Akal aa gayi, enlightened. And when they enlightened, they've realized that no, religion should not be over our head. A priest should not be over our head. We should be having a condition where bishops and cardinals should be limited to the church. We should have a lot of individual liberties. So the prospect of fundamental rights, the prospect of individual liberty, the prospect of constitution got its genesis in the Enlightenment. And later on, student, after Enlightenment, the French Revolution. The French Revolution plays a very, very important role. Why we always say French Revolution plays a very, very important role? Later on, because French Revolution leads towards three important terminology. ये तो आप सबने सुना ही होगा कभी ना कभी. थोड़ी इतनी हिस्ट्री आप सबने पढ़ी भी है स्कूल में, वो रिकॉल करने की जरूरत है. So French Revolution leads toward a situation where people were asking for more liberty, more equality, more fraternity, isn't it? And I need not to explain you liberty, equality, fraternity, that's what constitution is all about. So during this particular period, student, during the pre-modern times, in the pre-modern time, during the era of Enlightenment, during the era of French Revolution, and of course, British Bill of Rights. British Bill of Rights. What was British Bill of Rights? British Bill of Rights was considered to be the most important event after Magna Carta in Europe. क्योंकि मैग्ना कार्टा ने क्या किया था? मैग्ना कार्टा ने बता दिया था किंग इज नॉट अबव द लॉ, इवन किंग इज सब्जेक्टेड टू द लॉ. और बिल ऑफ राइट्स ने क्या श्योर किया था? बिल ऑफ राइट्स हैड श्योर्ड इन द ईयर 1689, इट हैड इंश्योर्ड दैट parliamentary supremacy is way above than monarchy supremacy. So it leads towards the foundation of more principles of democracy. Let me write it in one line. I hope you are writing along with me and connecting all the important points. Let me write in short form. The English Bill of Rights, as you can write it over here, English Bill of Rights. So what does English Bill of Rights all about? English Bill of Rights made sure that parliamentary supremacy is way higher, is more respected than monarchy. So this was the principle, student, which leads towards a very important event known as foundational principle of democratic system, where parliamentary supremacy, people been selected to govern over the people itself. They are being given more priority rather than the monarchy. So during ancient times, certain rules and certain norms being created by the kingdoms, by the institutions to make sure constitution got its genesis, but it got a golden chapter after Magna Carta, and it got more appropriate chapter after the event of Enlightenment, French Revolution, English Bill of Rights. Now comes the modern day times. Last, modern day times. So during the modern day times, modern day times, I should include time period of 1800 to right now. Modern day times, almost from the period of 1800 to right now, or somewhere around the period of 1800 to right now. So one very important event took place, during the modern time itself, is American Revolution, close to 1800, not exactly 1800, but close to 1800, American Revolution. And American Revolution plays a very, very important role. It plays a very, very significant role in the creation of American Constitution, US Constitution of the year 1787. So considered to be first written constitution of the world, US Constitution 1787. And what all are the golden lines of US Constitution? Any idea, student? Which is considered to be the golden line of American Constitution. Not only golden line of American Constitution, it is considered to be the hallmark or the significant principle of any constitution of the world. अगर आपसे कोई क्वेश्चन पूछे कि यार दुनिया में कई कंट्री के पास कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन है, which is considered to be the most important line of constitution of all the constitutions of the world, then how you are going to depict it, how you are going to answer it? The answer to this particular question is, as per the principles of American Revolution later on been well grafted in the US Constitution, one of the most important line which are very much prevalent in the American Revolution US Constitution is, I'm writing it, all men are equal. All men are equal in front or in eyes of the state. All men are equal in eyes of the state. This is the most basic fundamental principle which can be associated with the principle of any constitution. So if you want to describe constitution, you are into initial stage of learning constitution. So one of the basic fundamental that you can associate with the studying parameters of constitution is, the very basic principle of constitution should be that all men and women are equal in the eyes of the state. All men need to be treated equally. And why did American Revolution took place? It has its own history. The Britishers were having 13 different colonies over there, and they were highly discriminatory in nature. So a revolution took place, and immediately after the revolution, the forefather of American Constitution decided that we'll be going to have a convention based upon which this line been created, known as all men are equal in the eyes of the state. And there should be a respect for individual right. कहाँ लिखूँ? यहाँ लिखता हूँ. There should be respect for individual rights. Huge respect for the individual rights. Huge respect for the individual right means whether it's a man, whether it's a woman, individual rights need to be respected, and there need to be a proper checks and balances whenever we'll be going to abide by the principle of constitution. So that's how in modern times constitution got its creation. Let me continue with one more important area over here. So in the modern times, student, in the modern time, let me write it. I'm continuing from where I've left. In the modern time, rule of law is now the priority. So why constitution is very important? Because in modern time, like right now, especially after the Second World War, rule of law is very, very important. Whether domestically or internationally, rule of law is considered to be most important parameter. You know, student, just couple of days ago, Donald Trump tweeted not exactly tweeted, because he write in his own social media. I'm not wrong whether it's his own social media or only relevant in America. There is one social media in America, Truth. So he wrote one tweet or one statement in his social media, Donald Trump, that Nigeria should take care of the Christian people in its own country. If Nigeria is not going to take care of Christian people, then we will definitely going to take some harsh step against Nigeria. So it's almost like a warning to Nigeria. Now a lot of people are interpreting कि अब Nigeria में तेल निकालना होगा, Nigeria में oil चाहिए, इसलिए वहाँ पर interfere करना चाहते हैं Donald Trump. And going beyond this statement, please understand, America is perhaps one of those countries in the world. And I'm saying with full authority and conviction, student. America is perhaps one of those countries in the world which respect rule of law like anything. Although they don't follow rule of law on so many different parameters, but it is perhaps the only country in the world which got into war with other country because they were not following rule of law in their own country. So America has a tenacity, America has the purpose of entering into the other people affairs or other country affairs, and most of the time they enter into other country affairs based upon the parameter that they are not following rule of law. So if you look into the historical evidences, there are hundreds of historical evidences where some genocide been going on, war been going on, and America gave a stern warning to the country कि war रोको, वॉर रोकने के साथ साथ जेनोसाइड रोको, आपस में सिविल वॉर करना बंद करो, अदरवाइज वी विल इंटरफियर. एंड वन वेरी प्राइम एविडेंस is the latest truth post by Donald Trump, where he is giving warning to the Nigerian administration, please take care of the Christian people, because if Christian peoples are going to be get genocide in this particular manner as Nigerian administration is doing it, promoting it and not controlling it, then we will going to take some military actions. So why America is so much concerned about these type of things? Because the answer to this particular question is, student, in modern time, rule of law is very, very important, and America is one such country which respect rule of law as per the constitutional principle. Although they have committed so many mistakes, but I'm not getting into the details of this mistake. What I'm saying is, it's one of the oldest democracy of the world. It is having one of the most significant constitution of the world, and its constitution respect rule of law. So in the modern time, constitution is all about rule of law, evolution of rule of law. As rule of law is evolving, so does constitution. Similarly, evolution of human rights. Evolution of human rights. Evolution of human rights means after 1945, we all know, after the culmination or stopping of the Second World War, few important institutions got its nomenclature, which includes United Nations. So United Nations has been created with the fundamental principles of protecting human rights all over the world. So जैसे जैसे दुनिया में rule of law की importance बढ़ रही है, human rights की importance बढ़ रही है, and of course growing relevance of democracy, growing relevance of social justice. I will explain this term, democracy, social justice, in our upcoming classes. As the world is moving ahead and more respect for human rights, more respect for democracy, more respect for social justice, and more respect for elections are going on, so does the constitutional values as well. So how constitution is evolving, student? Constitution is evolving based upon the principles which are being included by me in a couple of slides, student. So during the ancient time, there were more about informal custom, rules and tradition. But during the medieval time, constitution got its proper genesis. It is considered to be the first living purposes or document based upon which the constitution got its genesis, that is Magna Carta. तो Magna Carta होता है, Enlightenment होता है, French Revolution होता है, English Bill of Rights होता है, American Revolution होता है, America का constitution बनता है. That's how constitution is involved. Now, as rule of law been evolving, human rights been evolving, democracy been evolving, social justice is getting new parameter, elections are been evolving, and therefore student, constitution is always going through a process of continuous change. Therefore in my previous class, I've used a very powerful term, constitution is a living document. अब आया समझ में? Constitution is a living document क्यों बोलते हैं? क्योंकि rule of law के parameters, respect for rule of law, human rights, social justice, election, democracy, institution accountability, transparency, they've been evolving at a very rapid pace. अब तो हम information tech के era में हैं. So principles of accountability, principles of transparency, they've been evolving at a very rapid pace. And since they are evolving at a very rapid pace, so does the constitution, student. So constitution is considered to be one of the most important document for any democratic country. And as far as the democratic country is concerned, they should make sure that these principles that I've just shared with you, they need to be firmly observed. They need to be firmly not only observed, but they need to be implemented in ground completely with its total spirit. तो इन सबको अगर इंक्लूड कर लें तो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन इवॉल्व हुआ है. लेट मी गो बैक टू द स्लाइड स्टूडेंट so that I can recall each and everything once again. So how the evolution of concept of constitution take place? As a concept, it has been evolving since millennia. It's an ongoing process. It's not been completed. It's an ongoing process. Maybe 100 years down the line, you'll be going to have new constitution of the world, which may be going to include new type of fundamental framework of rights, duties and responsibilities. तो ये तो चलता रहेगा प्रोसेस. लेकिन हिस्टोरिकल एविडेंस क्या है? Constitution got its genesis initially during the ancient time, where rules, tradition and custom was there. Code of Hammurabi I have already shared with you. As per Indian context, it was all about Kautilya Arthashastra, Dharma Shastra and of course the Dharma Sutra, which actually depicts Hindu way of living, and at the same time it gives the teaching of Veda and teaching of all important Vedic teachings. और इस तरीके से लोगों के रहने चालू हुए, रूल्स बनना चालू हुए, कस्टम्स चालू हुए, कास्ट सिस्टम देखने में आया एंड मोरालिटी और इमोरालिटी के टॉपिक तैयार हुए और वही हमारी सोसाइटी के कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल प्रिंसिपल बन गए. लेकिन यहां से बात नहीं बनी. लेटर ऑन ड्यूरिंग मेडिवल टाइम्स, मैग्ना कार्टा प्लेज अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट रोल. Enlightenment, one of the most important event in human history is enlightenment, where scientific evidences, quest for scientific evidence, यानी कि साइंटिफिक एविडेंस की चाहत बढ़ गई, क्वेस्ट फॉर साइंटिफिक एविडेंस एंड ऑफ कोर्स क्वेश्चन मार्किंग द अनकंट्रोल्ड पावर ऑफ मोनार्क्स बीन इंक्रीज्ड एंड ऑफ कोर्स चर्च बीन इंक्रीज. एज अ रिजल्ट ऑफ इट कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन गॉट इट्स फर्स्ट प्लेस. फ्रेंच रिवोल्यूशन, इंग्लिश बिल ऑफ राइट्स, later on American Revolution, American Constitution, which put a premium focus on individual rights, and of course a very important statement, all men are equal in the eyes of the state. It's a very important line which been abided by the principle of US Constitution. And that's how, student, Constitution got its nomenclature, Constitution got its idea. So Constitution, Constitutionalism, rule of law, ये एक ongoing process है. Rule of law का मतलब क्या है? Rule of law का मतलब है there should be no arbitrary power, but sometimes power can be redefined. We have to make sure power cannot be arbitrary. Because for example, आज से 30 साल पहले पावर में टेक्नोलॉजी का यूज नहीं था. आज पावर को यूज करते वक्त अथॉरिटी टेक्नोलॉजी का यूज करती हैं. So don't you think they should not use technology in an inappropriate manner? They should not intrude in our personal life, because privacy is indeed one of the important principles of Constitution. Therefore, student, rule of law is also going through a fundamental change. Basic principle remains the same, but when the term power keeps on changing after 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, we should make sure arbitrary power should not be there in the hands of the institution. And therefore, Constitution is the evolving concept. So a very important line for each and every one of you. Constitution is an evolving concept that has been going on since millennia. ये याद रखना. Constitution is an evolving concept that has been going on since millennia. So as time passes by, constitutional values also passes by. Now let's look into the other area. Let us look into classification of constitution. Types of constitution. It can also be known as types of constitution. It can be associated as classification of constitution. So classification of constitution. Constitution, why constitution is essential? Because it is going to create the distribution of power between various institutions. Now let us look into classification. So the first classification is very important. Written. Versus unwritten constitution. So you have the written constitution, you have the unwritten constitution. Written constitution is also known as codified, and unwritten constitution is also known as uncodified. So what is written constitution? Okay, let me write a written constitution. So what is written constitution? Written constitution are those constitution that outline every single government structure, power, rights, duties significantly, appropriately. Everything is been well written, and its amendment is very, very rigid process. It's not going to be amended very, very easily. So let me write it over here for the sake of your learning. What is written constitution? Written constitution means explicitly का मतलब होता है स्टूडेंट डायरेक्टली, और अच्छी vocabulary यूज करो. In my classes, you'll be going to learn a lot of rich vocabulary, both in terms of your answer writing and both in terms of the academics. And please make sure that these vocabularies are going to be there in your answer. The more that you are going to use this, the more you are going to get comfortable over a period of time. So what is written constitution? Written constitution means explicitly. Explicitly means सब कुछ साफ साफ. Explicitly outlines the power, function of government or a state. There is a big difference between government and state. This is something I'll be going to explain it to you later on. But for the larger sake of understanding of the topic, please write this point. Explicitly outlines the power and function of government, explicitly outline the power and function of state. Not only power and function, but it also explicitly explain various rights, various duties. Rights of citizen, duties of citizen. And its amendment का मतलब होता है constitution में कोई change. And its amendment is a very rigid process. It is not going to be very easy. It is considered to be rigid. It is not going to be flexible. It is going to be rigid. And the best part about written constitution is, a student, written constitution provides a lot of stability because things are being very explicitly been mentioned. So that's what the importance of written constitution. What are the example of written constitution? The best example of written constitutions are, of course, the American Constitution and the Indian Constitution. They are considered to be the best possible example of written constitution. What do we mean by unwritten constitution? Unwritten constitution, or the commonly word is uncodified constitution. Unwritten or uncodified constitution means they are not written in one document. In a single document, it has not included everything. In a single document, it has not included everything. But they are basically derived more from custom, more from convention, more from tradition, more from judicial interpretation. So what is unwritten, uncodified constitution? Uncodified constitution are those constitutions which are not written in one document. They are more based on convention. Convention, I hope you know, na? Convention is a type of protocol, trend, which they are following it. So it is more based upon convention, some type of protocol, more based on tradition. For example, tradition. For example, nowhere been written, but who is going to become the speaker of a house? Whether it is from the ruling party, whether it is from the unruling party, and they are not been written. It's a tradition that they are following. So based on convention, based on tradition, very important terminology, based on judicial precedents. Based on judicial precedents. What is judicial precedent? That's DENTS. Judicial precedent. Judicial precedents means interpretation of the constitution by the judiciary. तो judiciary ने कुछ कह दिया और वो एक इंटरप्रिटेशन हो गया और वही इंटरप्रिटेशन एक कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन मान लिया गया. सो दे आर मोर और लेस डिपेंड अपॉन द जुडिशियल प्रेसिडेंट and they are known as unwritten, uncodified. And what is specific about unwritten constitution, uncodified constitution? The most important terminology is they are flexible, they are flexible, they can be easily considered to be amended. They can be easily considered to be amended as the time and need arises. So they are very flexible in its approach. And the best possible example of the unwritten or uncodified constitution is New Zealand constitution and of course the British constitution. So you got the UK constitution and New Zealand constitution. They are considered to be two primary examples of the unwritten or uncodified constitution. So these are the two examples of written and unwritten constitution. Moving on, apart from that, constitution classification can also be done in one very significant manner, which is rigid and flexible. As the name suggests, it has been closely connected with our previous point. So rigid constitution are those constitutions which are very difficult to amend. Which are very, very difficult to amend. Difficult to amend means it requires a very unique type of spatial majority. It requires a very unique type of spatial majority or maybe a referendum. For example, in America, you need to have a 2/3 approval from Congress, their parliament, and of course they need to have a approval, 3/4 approval from the ratification of the United States as well. And if I'm not wrong, US Constitution been created in the year 1787. It's been already, student, it's been already almost more than 240 years now, but still, student, they have not been amended multiple times. If I'm not wrong, US Constitution has been amended 27 times right now. अमेरिका का कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन केवल 27 बार अमेंड किया गया. लेट मी क्रॉस चेक इट वेदर इट इज 27 or 28. I have to take the help of Professor Google. Let me take the help of Professor Google. So let me type. I guess it is 27. How many? How many US amendments are there? It is 27. ChatGPT is suggesting 27. And the 27th amendments been there in the United States so far. So that famous Philadelphia Convention that related to the creation of the American system of constitutional governance, it has been amended only 27 times because they have a very, very special and unique methodology of amendment which requires a very special majority, very, very special majority based upon which the US Constitution or any constitution which I'm going to give you the example are going to get amended. So rigid constitution are difficult to amend. On the contrary, flexible constitution are easy to amend. They are easy to keep on writing, keep on preparing your notes. They are easy to amend because it's very easy to adopt as per the new system, as per the new available condition, and it can be amended as per the ordinary simple majority. 50% present and voting, ordinary simple majority. So one of the unique feature of the world is related to the amendment of the constitution. And as far as the rigidity and flexible approach is concerned, Indian constitution is up to certain extent is also considered to be a rigid constitution. It cannot be amended in a very easy go method. And American constitution is considered to be a very tough nut to amend. Therefore, example of the rigid and flexible are the same as I have already gone through in the written and unwritten constitution. Moving on. One most important classification of constitution as a student, where there can be more learning, is a federal constitution, and of course a unitary constitution. A federal constitution or a unitary constitution. Although the word federal requires a lot of introspection, lot of learning, but for the sake of our learning, I'm going to give you a very limited expression, a very limited learning over here, because this is something हम आगे चल के और बहुत ज़्यादा पढ़ने वाले हैं. So what is federal constitution? Federal constitution means which gives exact understanding of the division of power between center and state, which gives complete understanding of the complete division of power, complete division of power between union and state. यूनियन एंड स्टेट्स, यूनियन क्या होता है, सेंटर क्या होता है, कहाँ यूनियन यूज़ करते हैं, कहाँ सेंटर यूज़ करते हैं, ये मेथोडोलॉजी, ये लर्निंग, ये मैच्योरिटी आती रहेगी. जहाँ ज़रूरत पड़ेगी वहाँ एक्सप्लेन करेंगे. अभी केवल टर्मिनोलॉजीज लिखेंगे, बिकॉज माई प्राइमरी पर्पस इज टू टीच यू फेडरल एंड यूनिटरी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन. वंस विल बी गोइंग टू लुक इन टू द अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ फेडरलिज्म, देन आई विल टीच यू what is union, what is center, where do you use the term union, where do we use the term center. This is something we'll be going to learn later on, but as of now, federal constitution means which gives a complete division of power between the union and state. It gives the complete division of power, and federal constitution is one which respect local autonomy. Which respect local autonomy, which means you have the center, you have the union, you have the state, you have the municipality, and all the powers of municipality, all the power of states, and all the power of union are very well described. And federal constitution are those which are having written division of power. They have a written division of power, which means clear-cut division of power as such. And the primary example of federal constitution of the world are, number one, of course, American Constitution. American Constitution is the primary example of federal constitution. Indian Constitution is also the example of federal constitution because India has a 7th schedule. हमारी constitution में एक 7th schedule है. In 7th schedule, you have the state list, union list, concurrent list, very well described. So Indian Constitution is also considered to be a federal constitution. But apart from that, there are few other constitution of the world which are also considered to be a federal constitution of the world. So you have the Canadian Constitution. If I'm not wrong, Canadian Constitution 1867. I'm not sure about the year, you can cross check it. Canadian Constitution 1867, Australian Constitution 1900. So American Constitution, Indian Constitution, Canadian Constitution, Australian Constitution, Germany and Malaysian Constitution, Malaysia and Germany. They all are considered to be the prime example of federal constitution. Federal constitution means complete power of every institution belonging to the center, belonging to the state. So you have the upper house, Raj Sabha power, you have the lower house, Lok Sabha power, you have the center power in the union list, you have the state power in the state list, and you have a concurrent power in which state can also make law, union can also make law. All these things are very well described in the constitution, and Indian constitution is considered to be the primary example of it. Although we do not consider to be a unique example of federal constitution because हमारे यहाँ बहुत सारी power जो है वो federal constitution के नाम पर center के पास जाता है. So we are primarily more of quasi-federal, but as far as the learning is concerned, as far as the example is concerned, India is definitely considered to be one of the example of federal constitution. If not in toto, if not in totality, at least more than partially, India is indeed an example of federal constitution. And as far as the unitary constitution, which means power belong to the center government alone. So in the unitary constitution, or let me write with red marker. In unitary constitution, power is concentrated onto the hands of central government. Power is concentrated onto the hands of central government. It means they hold the supreme power and they are the one who will decide whether regional institution shall be given power or not. In unitary constitution, constitution does not describe whether regional authority will have power or not. Constitution ये नहीं describe नहीं करता है कि regional authority को power होगी कि नहीं. यूनिटरी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में केवल यह लिखा जाता है कि सेंटर के पास पावर होगी कि रीजनल अथॉरिटी को पावर देनी है कि नहीं. दैट्स इट. वेदर they want to give it, whether they do not give it, it is based upon the conviction, it is based upon the understanding, it is based upon the prerogative of the central government. So constitution of unitary constitution only say one thing, that is regional authority will have power based upon the delegation of it from the center. Whether delegation is going to be there from the center or not, it depends upon the wisdom of the center alone. तो यूनिटरी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में क्या होता है? इन द यूनिटरी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन रीजनल अथॉरिटी get delegated power from center. Delegated power from center, and it is not even written in constitution. कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में ये नहीं लिखा रहता कि देना पड़ेगी, नहीं, ये नहीं लिखा हुआ. कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में केवल लिखा है कि इफ center thinks that there should be a delegation of power to the regional institution, then they will give it to them, otherwise they will not, which includes certain state government, which includes certain state institution as well. So it's more depend upon the delegation of power. So regional authority get delegated power from center. And what all are the primary example of it? The primary example of the unitary constitution where more power is concentrated into the hands of center is France and Japan. The Constitution of France, Constitution of Japan is considered to be the primary example of the unitary constitution itself. There are some other constitution as well. For example, Constitution of Sri Lanka, Constitution of Singapore, up to certain extent Constitution of Britain. They all are considered to be the example of having a unitary purpose. Primary example is France and Japan. So please keep these things in mind. These are all the initial stages of your learning, and I am one of those people who will make sure every possible thing related to the overall preparation of Indian polity and constitution should be there. Of course, you will read certain books as per the understanding that I'll be going to share with you. But reading books should be the second stage of your preparation. The first stage of your preparation is to know the fundamental aspect of preparation completely, and that's what I've been doing with you. So this is again a very important parameter of the classification of constitution, the federal and the unitary. अब होता क्या है, किताबों में केवल यहाँ तक मेंशन करके आगे बढ़ जाते हैं, बेसिक चीज़ें और नहीं बताते हैं, और वही चीज़ हमको थोड़ा सा अप्रोप्रिएटली पढ़नी है, मैच्योरिटी के साथ पढ़नी है. एंड वन मोर classification, student, one more classification that we can read in terms of the classification of constitution itself, it's the presidential constitution, presidential system of government. I'm writing in short form. I hope it will make sense to you. More of presidential system of constitution and more of parliamentary system of constitution. So in the presidential system of constitutional value, president is the head of the state. So president is the head of the state. And president being directly elected. President is the head of the state. President is the head of the state and been directly elected, which means president के लिए ही लोग directly vote करेंगे. Of course, through the medium of electoral college itself. And president is the head of the state, been directly elected. For example, Brazil and America. So Brazil and USA is considered to be the example of presidential constitutional system. Whereas in the parliamentary constitutional system, in the parliamentary constitutional system, there is a different provision altogether, and that provision is president is indeed the head of the state, but only considered to be a titular head or a ceremonial head. President is only considered to be a ceremonial head. Ceremonial head, or I would rather use a very important term that lot of books refrain to use. बहुत सारी किताबें यूज़ नहीं करती हैं, लेकिन कहीं कहीं लिखा हुआ है, वो mentioned है. President is only considered to be a ceremonial head or a titular head. Titular head का मतलब होता है नाम मात्र को, केवल नाम का ही head है. बाकी तो कोई काम धाम है नहीं, नाम का ही हेड है, ऐसा बोला जाता है. सो प्रेसिडेंट इज ओनली कंसिडर्ड टू बी अ सेरेमोनियल हेड और अ टिटुलर हेड इटसेल्फ. एंड ऑफ कोर्स more power. Who is going to be the prime minister over there? Prime minister is going to be the head of the government. President is going to be the head of the state. But even though being the head of the state, it is more of a ceremonial head or a titular head because the major power belongs to the prime minister itself. Of course, major decision of the executive are going to be in the name of the president. But president has to act on the aid and advice of the council of minister. ऐसा आपके articles में भी लिखा हुआ है, which we'll be going to read. So here you have in the parliamentary constitutional system, you have the example of India, you have the example of UK, which is considered to be a parliamentary constitutional system. So this is again a difference, student, between a presidential constitutional system and a parliamentary constitutional system. Moving on, last classification, perhaps the most important one. The most important one, student, which we actually do not put our primary focus. A very neglected one, which is the evolved constitution. Which is the evolved constitution, which means there is no one particular date where the constitution has been declared to be the date or declared to be the date where constitution has been adopted. Evolved constitution means develop gradually, stage by stage, develop gradually, based more on tradition, based more on custom, based more on incremental changes, and it has not been one particular day by the constituent assembly where it has been declared either enacted or evolved. So enacted or adopted. So you have the evolved constitution, and other than that you have the enacted constitution. You have the enacted constitution. So these are the two type of constitution. So what is evolved constitution? Evolved constitution means developed gradually, stage by stage. Although, to be very honest, every constitution developed gradually, but there has to be certain time period where they have worked effectively for the finalization of it. So any constitution where there is no particular date, no particular day in the period of history where it can be associated कि ये वो दिन था जहां constitution adopt कर लिया गया, तो इस टाइप के constitution को हम evolved कहते हैं. Evolved means not created on a single day, develop gradually, or not created on a particular day, not created on a particular day. Develop gradually. Develop gradually means based more upon tradition, based more upon customs, and based more upon incremental changes, one by one. Incremental changes. What all are the examples of it? Examples are, of course, UK and Israel. The Israeli constitution and of course the UK constitution, they are considered to be developing in a stage, develop gradually over a period of time. Counter to that, what all we mean by enact constitution? Enact constitution means there is a particular day in which constitution was enacted. So was enacted on a particular day. For example, Indian Constituent Assembly started its functioning, and on one particular day, to be very honest, 26th of November 1949, Indian Constitution was enacted, adopted, and later on 26th of January 1950, it been starting its functioning itself, commonly known as enforced. So what is enacted constitution? Enacted constitution are those constitution which are enacted on a particular day. There is a proper day, proper time in which constitution been finalized. Finalized by whom? Finalized by a constituent assembly. Was enacted on a particular day by a constituent assembly. Was been adopted by a constituent assembly. And which are the best example of it? Of course, India is indeed the best example of it, and India and South Africa. India and South Africa. We all know South Africa was suffering from apartheid, where black peoples were not given appropriate right. But in the year 1995, 1996, when they decided to create their own constitution, they've decided that there is going to be no racial discrimination in their country. So India and South Africa are those considered to be those important countries which are having the example of enacted constitution. So please understand a very important parameter over here, difference between the evolved constitution and enacted constitution. So let me recall all the classification. अभी मैं धीरे धीरे ही पढ़ रहा हूँ और I hope you are starting enjoying, because please understand, enjoying the topic really matter a lot. I know when you are there in the offline classes, things would be slightly different, but considering the need of the hour and considering the comfort of your home which you are sitting and doing the classes, you need to respect the process, student. Process is more important than the final result. And these are the important classification I have gone through. Written and unwritten constitution, the codified and the uncodified constitution. I have given you the explanation. मैं लिख भी रहा हूँ साथ में ताकि तुम्हारे notes तैयार हो जाएं. You have the rigid and flexible constitution. You have the very important federal and unitary constitution. You have the presidential and parliamentary system of constitution. And last but not the least, evolved and enacted constitution. So what is India's identity? Indian identity is, number one, it is a written constitution. It is a federal constitution up to certain extent. It is up to certain extent a rigid constitution. And at the same time, because we also have a basic structure theory these days, it is up to certain extent a rigid constitution, and at the same time, it is also having a very unique identity. It is indeed an enacted constitution given by the forefathers of ours. Now I'm asking you a question, a proper UPSC question that I'm sharing with you. Let me write a question. And it's a proper academic question, although I'm not motivating it to you to write as it is right now. Because writing answer I will teach you at least 1-1.5 हफ्ते 2 हफ्ते की क्लास हो जाए पहले मेरी, फिर मैं खूब सारे क्वेश्चंस देने स्टार्ट कर दूंगा. So as of now, just putting up a question in front of you, a very important one. Why most of the, write along with me, why most of the modern day constitution are preferred to have a written constitution? Why most of the modern day constitution of the world are preferred or are preferring to have a written constitution? In fact, these days there is a debate going on in among the British parliamentarian as well. British parliamentarians are also demanding one very specific need, that it is the right time for Britain to start having the written constitution. They were more related to the convention, they've been more related to the tradition. But right now Europe is going through a very turbulent time. The whole demography of Europe is about to be changed. So therefore these days there are a lot of important voices among the fraternity of British Parliament itself, that they are demanding कि भाई अब हमारे लिए भी बहुत ज़रूरी हो गया कि let us have a written constitution altogether. So one very specific question that I want to ask, why most of the modern day constitution of the world, modern day constitution are preferred to have a written constitution? Why exactly we need to have a written constitution? For example, American constitution, the Canadian constitution, the Indian constitution, Australian constitution of the world, they are considered to be a properly well written constitution. Why exactly? And why it should be a preferred choice? So let's look into the preferred choice itself. Number one, student. Number one, I'm writing the answer right now. I'll give you the synopsis. तो जब questions आए ना तो उसको ऐसे handle करना है. Right now you need not to attempt the question because it's still very early days for you. अभी तो हमने धीरे धीरे अभी sprint तो बाद में करेंगे, अभी तो हमने walk करना चालू किया है. So we are still into the initial days. That's class number 2 only for you. So written constitution के साथ एक खास बात होती है. Written constitution directly became the best part about written constitution is it directly became the fundamental law of the land. It directly became the fundamental law of the land, based upon which all other law are going to get generated, isn't it? A very simple thing which I have already gone through in my initial class. It became the fundamental law of the land. And not only it became the fundamental law of the land, The best part about written constitution, it demarcate the boundary of every institution. क्योंकि भाई constitution का तो मतलब ही होता है doctrine of limited government. So it demarcate the boundary of judiciary, executive and legislature. Or if you do not want to write this term, you can also write it demarcate the boundary of every other democratic institution. Or the best part about written constitution is it control the arbitrariness. Arbitrariness of institution being put under check. What a beautiful line, student. The arbitrariness of various important institutions so that they do not go haywire, अपनी लिमिट से बाहर न निकल जाएं, and under the principle of doctrine of limited government, the arbitrariness and unreasonability of institution need to be under complete check. And the hallmark of written constitution, it support it makes sure that there are not going to be any arbitrariness of the institution. And one of the most important aspect of written constitution, whether in India or in America as well, one of the most important parameter of written constitution is written constitution supports the idea of judicial review, and that too explicitly. It supports the idea of judicial review. It supports the idea of judicial review. And why judicial review is very, very important? Judicial review is very, very important because judiciary is considered to be the guardian and protector of constitution. And if judiciary is the guardian and protector of the constitution, and that to be considered to be explicitly a part of the written constitution, then the arbitrariness of any institution, including judiciary, is going to get under control. So one very preferred choice of written constitution is, if question is going to be like in this manner, why most of the modern day constitutions are preferring to have a written constitution? Written constitution supports the idea of judicial review, and we all know judiciary is the guardian and protector of constitutional value. Judiciary is the guardian and protector of not only constitution but also constitutional values. Not only constitution and also constitutional values, which are being closely related with constitutionalism. And therefore, we definitely going to make sure these explicit written document are going to make sure that the institutions are going to work within their limit. They are not going to cross their limit, and the fundamental rights of individuals are going to be get respected like anything. So this is the importance of having a written constitution, student. And Indian constitution, as we all know, Indian constitution is also a written constitution, and written constitution primarily means legislature cannot make any type of law which is against the value of constitution itself. And if it is going to be against the value of constitution, then under the principle of judicial review, we'll be going to have a situation where judiciary will ultimately turning out to be the guardian and protector of constitution, and they will discard, they will reject those type of law which are against the constitutional values. अब होता क्या है, जो अनरिटन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन है उनमें ये सब बातें लिखी नहीं है, ये सब बातें ना तो लिखी हुई हैं और more or less they are actually being depend upon the mercy of the judicial officer itself. It's the judicial officer which will describe कि हाँ भाई judicial review होगा, हाँ भाई ऐसा law बनना चाहिए. So they are actually being more dependent on the wisdom of judicial officer rather than the constitution itself, because they don't have written document. Therefore, student, if you look into the constitution of the world, America and Indian constitution are considered to be more preferred choice because they are the written constitution of the world, and written constitution of the world directly and up to certain extent indirectly promotes the idea of judicial review. And these are the basic tenets which need to be followed. So a very important principle, student, that we have to look into. So it's the initial stage of your learning, and a very important terminology that you are writing it, reading it and learning it. Why do we need to have a written constitution? Batao bhai, why do we need to have a written constitution? Why India preferred to have a written constitution? India preferred to have a written constitution because हमारी constituent assembly ने decide किया था the kind of diversity that we have, if we are going to not have a well demarcation of the boundary of judiciary, executive and legislature, it may be possible that all three are going to get collide with each other. And therefore, Ambedkar used to say one thing, judicial review, the parameter of the judicial review. And apart from the parameter of the judicial review, Ambedkar used to say one thing, that bad constitution will do wonders if lawmakers are going to follow the principle of rule of law and constitutionalism. So this is again a very important topic that we have to look into. So I have shared with you Indian constitution as the written constitution postulates. Now let's look into certain important definitions. Please give the subheadline. What is the difference between constitution and constitutional law? Both sound same, but there is a difference. What is the basic difference between constitution and constitutional law? A very important learning for each and every one of us. In my previous session, I've told you the difference between constitution and constitutionalism. I've told you constitutionalism is more relevant, constitutionalism is more important than the word constitutional itself, because constitutionalism is all about those philosophy based upon which the constitution are going to get included. I am going to have my rights, you are going to have your rights, but on what parameter will be going to have rights, what type of rights we are going to enjoy, that can only be given by the constitutionalism. And I have given you at least 3 or 4 handy points related to constitutionalism. Now change our track. Now let's look into one basic difference between constitution and constitutionalism. If I do not want to exaggerate the topic, but in a very important learning parameter, this Venn diagram makes more sense. Student, constitution is very much required, but constitutional law is considered to be more relevant, more appropriate. So both are important. Constitution is also important, but at the same time, interpretation of the constitution is more important. Listen to this word very seriously. Constitution is important, but interpretation of constitution is more important. And that interpretation of constitution is commonly known as constitutional law. So let us look into the detail, or let us look into the all important parameter. What do we mean by constitution and constitutional law? So first point, student. First point, constitutional law. Let me write in short form. Constitutional law is more broader than constitution itself. It is more broader, as you can see this Venn diagram. What this Venn diagram is all about? This Venn diagram is all about all A's are B's, which means whatever is A is definitely a part of B, but whatever is B may not be a part of A. So here you have constitution, and above that constitutional law is the upper circle, and the constitution is the concentric circle that I'm using it over here. So constitutional law is more broader than constitutional law, constitution itself. Constitutional law ज़्यादा बड़ा dimension है, ज़्यादा बड़ा term है constitution के comparison में. Can I give you example? I'll give you definitely some more example related to it. Constitutional law, I'm writing in short form, I hope it makes sense to you. Constitutional law is related to power, rights, duties, various doctrine, very important, various doctrine. Constitutional law include various power, various right, various duty, various doctrine, and various other mechanism which are essential to have a constitution. Various power, various right, various duty, various doctrine, based upon which the constitution has been created. based upon which the constitution has been created. So, student, constitutional law is primarily known as the fundamental law of the land. It is the real interpretation of the law and land, based upon which various power, rights, duty, various doctrine, based upon which the constitution has been created. So once constitution is going to get created, so constitution is going to be only written terminology, clause 1, clause 2, clause 3, but the interpretation of those clause 1, clause 2, clause 3 is considered to be the constitutional law. So there is a difference between constitution, there is a difference between constitutional law. For example, follow my hand, follow my document. So this is the syllabus. So whatever that I have written is the syllabus, and whatever that I am teaching is the interpretation of the syllabus. So this interpretation of the syllabus is the real understanding of the syllabus rather than these words. तो अगर आपको ये syllabus पढ़ना है तो आपको ये 16 पन्ने नहीं पढ़ने हैं, ये PDF फाइल नहीं पढ़नी है, आपको इस PDF फाइल में जो जो वर्ड्स लिखे हुए हैं उनके इंटरप्रिटेशन को समझना है. सो इफ यू रियली वांट टू स्टडी द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, यू नीड टू बिकम द स्टूडेंट ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल लॉ. If you really want to study the constitution, you should better try to become the student of the constitutional law. If you want to study the UPSC syllabus of Indian polity and constitution, you are not supposed to read these 16 pages. You are supposed to create the understanding of every different point that has been given in these pages. You need to be slightly elaborative in your approach. So one primary difference between constitution and constitutional law is constitutional law is the doctrine based upon which the constitution has been created. Constitutional law is the philosophy, constitutional law is the interpretation, constitutional law is the purposes based upon which the constitution has been created. थोड़ा सा और elaborate करते हैं. Over here, over here, what is constitution? Constitution is basically a type of rule book. It's the type of rule book which includes all provision, isn't it? Which includes all provision. Then what is constitutional law? Constitutional law is basically the guidebook. And I hope you know the difference between rule book and the guidebook, isn't it? Guidebook in real life. So you have the rule book and you have the interpretation of that rule book. So constitutional law is the guidebook. Constitution is the rule book alone. Constitutional law is the guidebook alone, which includes various doctrine and its explanation as well. So we have to read constitutional law, we have to read constitution. Rule book तो हम पढ़ रहे हैं, rule book का interpretation पढ़ना ज़्यादा ज़रूरी है. So you are doing classes with me, but what you are primarily doing? You are actually not only reading the constitution, you are not only learning the constitution, you are actually learning the philosophy behind constitution and the interpretation of that constitution. Therefore, we should be a student of both constitutional law and constitution as well. I'll give you one more example. I'll give you one more example related to it. Which example should I give it to you? Constitution basically mention the provision. It actually mention the provision. Short form में लिख रहा हूँ, mention the provision. And constitutional law actually interpret the provision. And constitutional law actually interpret the provision. Sir, what is the utility of this two difference? समझ में तो आ गया कि एक रूल बुक होता है, गाइड बुक होता है, एक में रूल लिखे हैं, एक में रूल का एक्सप्लेनेशन है. बट इसकी ज़रूरत हमें क्यों है? हम तो 22-23 साल के, हमें क्यों ज़रूरत है इसकी? वी आर प्रिपेयरिंग फॉर द एग्जाम. इज देयर एनी नीड फॉर इट? येस, देयर इज अ नीड फॉर इट, बिकॉज व्हेन यू आर गोइंग टू राइट द आंसर, you will write in this terminology, what is written is constitution, but what need to be acknowledged is constitutional law. What is written is constitution, what need to be acknowledged is constitutional law. Let me give you one very appropriate example out of it. A very, very important example. You will really going to learn a lot by this example. A very famous case, a very landmark case in India's constitutional history, in India's Supreme Court history, Shreya Shinghal case. What exactly is Shreya Shinghal case? For first of all, What is Article 19(1)(a) of India's Constitution? Article 19(1)(a) is all related to freedom of speech and expression. Freedom of speech and expression. Freedom of speech and expression that you are using in Twitter, that you are using in Instagram, because in Instagram you are expressing yourself. In Twitter you are writing yourself. In Facebook you are writing yourself. In newspaper you are writing yourself. In books you are writing yourself. In movies you are expressing yourself, so on and so forth. So every individual in our country is having a freedom of speech and expression. But we all know no freedom is absolute. There has to be certain restrictions. So होता क्या है, restrictions के नाम पर state authority actually go beyond their power, commonly known as they start using their arbitrary power. So there was a case which we all need to learn. Student, there was a case after the demise of Bal Thackeray, one of the most important politician India has ever had. After the demise of the Bal Thackeray, one girl in Mumbai or Thane, I guess, she commented something very rudely against Bal Thackeray, and of course the steps taken by authority after the demise by Bal Thackeray in Facebook. So once she committed some rude statement, as a result of it she been arrested, and once she been arrested, so based upon which one Delhi University girl, she was doing her law study from the Delhi University, she submitted a PIL, a public interest litigation, which I'll be going to share with you later on, in the Supreme Court. And she told the authority, her lawyer told the authorities, or her lawyer told the Supreme Court, that we all have freedom of speech and expression. We all know freedom of speech and expression is related to certain type of restrictions, but those restrictions should not be used arbitrarily by a local police inspector. Those restrictions cannot be used based upon the desire of any authority. There has to be certain guidelines, and unfortunately guidelines were only one dimensional, only one arbitrary. तो श्रेया सिंघल ने क्या किया, फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच और एक्सप्रेशन को बनाए रखने के लिए she challenged, let me write with red marker, she challenged section 66A of Information Technology Act 2000. She actually challenged the section 66A of Information Technology Act 2000, and under this act, student, at that particular period of time, under this act, you can be arrested. And what I'm using, you can be arrested for your online post in Facebook, in Twitter, and of course other social media medium. You can be arrested for your online post. Now arrest can be there provided if your statement is actually disturbing the peace of a country, provided if your statement is actually disturbing the social और religious harmony, उसमें अरेस्ट होता है. बट एक छोटा सा स्टेटमेंट किसी पॉलिटिशियन के खिलाफ कुछ मजाक में कुछ कह दिया, किसी पॉलिटिकल पार्टी के अगेंस्ट कुछ कह दिया, किसी आईएएस के अगेंस्ट कुछ कह दिया, उस पर अगर अरेस्ट होने लगे तो वो गलत है. और सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने क्या कहा, दैट सेक्शन 66A ऑफ आईटी एक्ट 2000 promotes arbitrary arrest. And since it promote arbitrary arrest, Supreme Court declare section 66A of IT Act 2000 as unconstitutional, and it acknowledge that we all have freedom of speech and expression, and freedom of speech and expression also means right to online freedom. It is not limited to Bollywood movies. It is not related to expression in theatre. It is not related to in our writing document. Right to online freedom is also related to our online purposes, online reading, online purposes as well, online social media as well. So in the Shreya Shingal case, Supreme Court acknowledged right to freedom of speech and expression also encapsulate the purpose of right to online freedom. Right to online freedom. Right to online freedom means you can also express yourself. You can also give indirect speech via the social media or via the modern day technological medium as well. And it declared unconstitutional the section 66A of IT Act 2000, which means section 66A should not be used indiscriminately on those people where they are expressing themselves and authorities are believing that it is against the state, it is against the country. तो होता क्या है, आपने कुछ टाइप किया, पुलिस ऑफिशियल बोलेगा हाँ भाई आपने एमएलए के खिलाफ कुछ लिखा है, आओ थाने, और थाने आएंगे, अरेस्ट कर लेंगे. तो ये पहले होता था. अब रुक गया है. Unfortunately, let me give you a ground reality, student. Let me give you a ground reality. It's been already more than 10 years, but Shreya Shingal case is a landmark case. But still, look at the unawareness among our police official in a local police station. The local police station is still using Section 66A of IT Act. When the matter landed up in court, then the honorable judges, they reprimand or they give a stern warning to the police official कि भाई कैसे यूज कर लिया, ये तो अनकॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल डिक्लेयर कर दिया गया है, ये धारा लगा कैसी दी आपने. फिर वहाँ माफ़ी मांगते हैं, हाथ पांव जोड़ते हैं फिर वो जज के सामने. तो ये हो रहा है, ये होती है एक रियलिटी स्टूडेंट. तो व्हाट इज द कनेक्शन बिटवीन ओवर हियर एंड श्रेया शिंगल केस? सो व्हाई श्रेया शिंगल केस इज वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट? बिकॉज श्रेया शिंगल केस not only explain the provision of Article 19(1)(a). What is Article 19(1)(a)? Article 19(1)(a) is a constitutional value. It is a rule book, which is freedom of speech and expression. But it has been interpreted to a new domain or to a new territory known as right to online freedom as well. And therefore, student, Shreya Shingal case is considered to be a very, very important landmark judgment in India's constitutional history. So, always remember, student, what is the basic difference between constitution and constitutional law? Constitution is more about a rule book. Constitution is more about depiction of the provision, and constitutional law is more about the guidebook and the interpretation of those provision, which can be very significantly explained by this example of Shreya Shingal. Or student, time is very limited, very, very limited time. Please, for God's sake, do not have this type of approach. Sir, पहले बहुत बच्चे वाली चीज़ पढ़ेंगे, पहले बहुत NCERT पढ़ेंगे, 10 दिन में NCERT कंप्लीट करेंगे. No, you have a limited time. You need to do it as soon as possible. So therefore, always raise your standard. Please make sure you go along with my learning itself. So right now, whatever that I'm doing it, keep on writing it. Whatever that I'm dictating it, whatever that I'm explaining it to you, keep on associate those things with you. But at the same time, there has to be certain self-learning approach from you as well. And self-learning approach means once you are going to do these type of things, and then you are going to put your entire focus onto the learning of from NCERT, another important book, then your overall understanding of the topic is going to be fundamentally on a very high pedestal altogether. तो ये मत सोचो कि अभी हमें शुरुआत में बहुत बच्चे वाली चीज़ें पढ़नी, हम पहले से ही ये चीज़ें करते रहेंगे और हम दोबारा मुड़ के नहीं देखेंगे. वी कीप ऑन फॉलोइंग द पेस. सो यू कैन डू दिस थिंग ओवर हियर, स्टूडेंट. लेट मी टाइप अ वेरी फेमस केस, श्रेया सिंघल case. So this is what Shreya Shingal case is all about, student. A very, very famous case. And let me click one image over here. I hope this image, this is no, आधा दिख रहा है ये तो. There is related to police station, Mumbai police station, Shaheen Dhada and Renu Srinivasan, दो लड़कियों का एक वो केस बना था. Let me go to one brief summary. Is there any brief summary? Is there any brief summary related to? Fine. I'm getting it, the brief summary. Just look into the brief summary. In the year 2012, two girls named as Shaheen Dhada and Renu Srinivasan were arrested by Mumbai police. The arrest was made for expressing their displeasure at a bandh which was called by the member of Shiv Sena for the incident of Shiv Sena chief बाल ठाकरे डेथ. तो बाल ठाकरे की डेथ होने के बाद बंद हो गया, तो उन्होंने अपना फेसबुक पर डिस्प्लेजर शो किया कि यार बंद क्यों करा रहे हो, तो उनको अरेस्ट कर लिया गया. The accusation made against the petitioner was that they were involved in posting their comment on the Facebook and liking the comment at the same time, which resulted in widespread public protest. Look at the audacity of public official. फेसबुक पे कमेंट किया, एक लड़की ने कमेंट लिखा, एक ने लाइक किया, दोनों को अरेस्ट कर लिया गया. और क्यों अरेस्ट कर लिया गया? बिकॉज दे बिलीव इट इज इनवाइटिंग द पब्लिक प्रोटेस्ट. इनवाइटिंग द पब्लिक प्रोटेस्ट एंड हैविंग पब्लिक प्रोटेस्ट इज ट्रूली अ डिफरेंट थिंग ऑल टुगेदर. बट ड्यू टू द प्रेशर ऑफ द पॉलिटिशियन इटसेल्फ, द पुलिस ऑफिशियल डिसाइडेड टू अरेस्ट बोथ ऑफ देम, एंड दैट लीड टुवर्ड्स द Shreya Shingal case, where the petitioner asked to abolish the provision of 66A, and Supreme Court finally decided to do so. The petitioner, by the way of public interest, filed the writ petition under Article 32 of the Constitution, claiming that Section 66A of IT Act 2000 violates the right of freedom of speech and expression of an individual. And that's what I have written it over here. So, how would you describe Constitution? It is only a provision. It is only a written provision. It is only a rule book. What really matters is not Constitution. What really matters is constitutional philosophy. What really matters is the interpretation of that Constitution. So look at my body language right now. Before writing the Constitution, constitutionalism is more important, because constitutionalism creates the philosophy, creates the doctrine based upon which the rights are going to get created. Once these rights are going to get created, it becomes the Constitution. And once this becomes the Constitution, it is going to be interpreted throughout the ages, throughout the era of Indian judicial system or Indian constitutional system. So constitutionalism, constitution, constitutional law, all are interconnected, but all are very relevant. Moving on. One more definition, student. What is the basic difference between ordinary law and constitutional law? What is the basic difference between ordinary law and constitutional law? So let us look into this particular area, ordinary law and constitutional law. So please understand, in any country legal system, there would be two types of law. Before getting into the detail of it, I have to share with you the definition or the difference between the ordinary law and constitutional law. What do we mean by constitutional law? What do we mean by ordinary law? Let's look into it one by one. So in any country legal system, you can have two types of law. Law number 1 and law number 2. Let's say किसी भी country में दो type के law हो सकते हैं, एक law number 1 और law number 2. Law number 1 is which actually define the power of, which actually define the relationship of between state and citizens. I am writing in short form, which actually define the relationship between state and citizen. What do we mean by relationship between state and citizen? Relationship between state and citizen means we have a state, so how a state is going to govern the citizens over there. So first of all, there are two types of law which can be associated with any particular country, student. Number 1, law number 1, which define the relationship between state and citizen. State and citizen means स्टेट की कुछ पावर होंगी, सिटीजन्स की कुछ पावर होंगी, स्टेट के कुछ राइट्स होंगे, सिटीजन्स के कुछ राइट होंगे, और उनके बीच का रिलेशनशिप क्या रहेगा? व्हाट टाइप ऑफ रिलेशनशिप दैट दे आर गोइंग टू एंजॉय, what type of relationship that they are going to enjoy, what type of duties that they are going to have, what type of rights that they are going to have. There are going to be law number 1. And then there is one other type of law under which various state government, not exactly state government, under which various institution of state का मतलब यहाँ मध्य प्रदेश और उत्तर प्रदेश नहीं, state is basically a larger idea of India itself or a country itself. There is a proper definition of a state which we'll be going to do it later on. So various institution of a state. So there is going to be law number 2 under which various institution of states are going to get governed. So student, in any legal system, there can be two type of law. Two type of law means how the state institutions are going to get governed and how state institutions are going to make a relationship with the citizens. So in order to have a proper relationship between state and citizens, we need to have a constitutional law. And in order to have a various functioning of state government institution or state institution, we need to have a ordinary law. So what do we mean by ordinary law and what do we mean by constitutional law? Both sound slightly same, but there is a stark difference between the ordinary law and constitutional law, which can be understood in this manner. तो स्टूडेंट, हमारा स्टेट के साथ क्या रिलेशन है? हमारा स्टेट के साथ रिलेशन है, स्टेट ये कोशिश करेगा that my fundamental rights are going to be firmly intact. My fundamental rights are going to be firmly intact. My fundamental rights are going to be protected. A state will not take any decision which is going to be against the spirit of fundamental rights of mine. Because who provide me fundamental right? Does the state provide me fundamental right? No. It's the constitutional value that provide me fundamental right. So relationship between state and citizen, relationship between state and citizen is primarily the hallmark of constitutional law. So why do we need constitutional law? We need constitutional law which will make sure, it will instruct the state to make sure rights of individual, duties of individual, and of course various different type of liberty and freedom of individuals are going to be there. So constitutional law are those law which actually describe in detail, the relationship between state and citizen or relationship between government and citizen. Whereas how the government will function on its own, what are going to be the different institution of government and how they will function on its own, we need to have a proper ordinary law. So what is ordinary law? Ordinary law is primarily related to various institutions of state, how they are going to get governed. How various other different institution of the states, how they are going to get governed. कि मान लेते हैं भाई कि अब हमारे यहाँ मान लेते हैं पुलिस जो है, तो पुलिस का एक इंटीरियर लॉ होगा कि पुलिस का एक इंटीरियर लॉ होगा बेस्ड अपॉन विच द पुलिस ऑफिशियल्स आर गोइंग टू वर्क. द पुलिस रूल बुक इज गोइंग टू बी देयर बेस्ड अपॉन विच दे आर गोइंग टू वर्क. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, लेट्स से मोटर व्हीकल एक्ट. So what is motor vehicle act? Motor vehicle act is been created by the parliament and it has been given the authority to the police official to implement this motor vehicle act on ground. So ये जो मोटर व्हीकल एक्ट है, ये बेसिकली इंस्ट्रक्शन है पुलिस ऑफिशियल को कि इस एक्ट के अकॉर्डिंग इंडिया में ट्रैफिक मैनेजमेंट करने की कोशिश करो. So when I use the term ordinary law are those laws which basically describe the relationship within the state institution, which actually describe within the various important provision under which the state institutions are going to work. So ordinary law and constitutional law both are relevant, but it's the constitutional law which hold more important because it actually established the relationship between a state and citizen. So if you want to write, you please write one specific definition which are very essential for your overall learning. So please write definition number 1, or you can do it in this manner. Let me do it in this manner. Let me help you out in this manner. एक तरफ लिखते हैं हम लोग ordinary law. And let me write constitutional law. So on one hand, let us write ordinary law, and on one hand, let us write the constitutional law. So please write, first of all, over here in constitutional law, please write those law which define the division of power, those law which define the division of power, those law which define the division of power between various, those law which define division of power between various central and state government power, between various central and state government power, between various central and state government power, between various central and state government power are commonly known as constitutional law, are commonly known as constitutional law, are commonly known as constitutional law, are commonly known as constitutional law. उसी के आगे लिख लो law which establish law which establish the relationship between law which establish the relationship between citizen and states, law which establish the relationship between citizen and state is commonly known as constitutional law. And on the other hand, now write the definition of ordinary law. Those law by which various state government institution will govern state or government institution will govern स्टेट को काम करने के लिए कुछ लॉ बनाए जाएंगे ना, तो दोज लॉ बाय विच वेरियस स्टेट और गवर्नमेंट इंस्टीट्यूशन विल गवर्न are known as ordinary law. So ordinary law are those law which are very essential for the government institution to work. After all, they get the legitimacy of the parliament or legitimacy of the legislature to work. Law which establish relationship between center and citizen, law which establish relationship between government and citizen are known as constitutional law. Law which make sure state government are going to functioning in this particular order are known as ordinary law. तो ऑर्डिनरी लॉ वो होते हैं जिसमें कि स्टेट को कैसे काम करना है उसको डिफाइन किया जाता है, स्टेट के इंस्टीट्यूशन को कैसे काम करना है उसको डिफाइन किया जाता है. एंड दोज लॉ विच एक्चुअली डिस्क्राइब और एस्टेब्लिश द लार्जर प्रिंसिपल ऑफ रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन सेंटर एंड citizen or state and citizen is largely known as the constitutional law. It is also related to the division of power where a state has its own power, center has its own power, and they are making sure that the principles of constitutions are going to be there in order to protect the rights of the people. तो ordinary law और साथ ही साथ constitutional law में difference होता है. Ordinary law is more or less related to small laws, small rule books, simple law created in the parliament, created in the legislature to make sure that the day-to-day functioning of the government is going to be there. So why ordinary law are important? Ordinary law are important for day-to-day functioning of the executive. It is important for day-to-day functioning of the executive. As I've already told you, Motor Vehicle Act. तो मोटर व्हीकल एक्ट में 500 रुपए का चालान कटेगा, 1000 का कटेगा, 5000 का कटेगा. These are all the provision which are being created by the parliamentary law itself for to make sure that the local RTO or local traffic inspector or the DSP of the traffic police are going to make sure that the provisions of law and order are going to get maintained on ground. So day-to-day functioning of executive is law. Those law which are related to day-to-day functioning of executive are commonly known as ordinary law. These are the law by which various government institutions will govern. So I have already written various government institutions. For example, how will BSNL work? How will DDA work? How will let's say this institution traffic police will work? So all type of law are known as ordinary law, which will make sure day-to-day functioning of the government institutions are going to be there on the ground. Whereas constitutional law are those law which are related to establish the relationship between center and of course state government, and at the same time the constitutional laws are those law which are going to make sure the relationship between the center and of course the citizens. So fundamental rights. So law related to fundamental rights. Fundamental rights related law. So those laws which are related to fundamental rights, those specific law. I'll give you example, don't worry. Those law which are very, very specifically related to fundamental rights, which are exactly as per the respect of the fundamental rights, they are commonly known as constitutional law, because fundamental rights are basically those type of rights which establish the relationship between a state and citizen. So any law which is related to citizen, which is related to basic rights, which is related to basic human rights, which is related to fundamental rights of the constitution, any law which actually related to the fundamental rights or protection of the fundamental rights of the citizen are known as the constitutional law, and any law which is related to day-to-day function of the executive is commonly known as the ordinary law itself. So अब थोड़ा और एग्जाम्पल पर आते हैं. So what is ordinary law? Ordinary law are made by parliament. They are made by parliament and can be easily amended. And can be easily amended. Why I am using the word easily amended? Easily amended means because majority belongs to the government, and based upon the 50% majority that they are having it in both the houses, they can easily amend it. They can easily amend it as per the provision of the constitution. Whereas constitutional law cannot be easily amended because it does require the certain special provision related to amendment. It required certain special provision related to amendment, which is Article 368, which is related to amendment of the constitution. A special provision related to amendment. A special provision related to amendment. It is not easy to amend the constitutional law because constitutional law are basically considered to be those laws which are very, very important, which are primarily related to the rights of the citizen, and rights of the citizens cannot be taken away by a simple majority. It does require a special majority. It does require a special majority. So special majority वाले जो law होते हैं, which are basically considered to be under the provision of the constitutional law itself, because it is related to the relationship between the state and the citizen itself. This cannot be easily taken away. And at the same time, student, here you have the ordinary law. Ordinary law is more or less related to the day-to-day functioning of the executive, made by the parliament, can be easily amended. Yes, if any ordinary law enter into the area of constitutional law, or I would rather say, if any ordinary law breaks the provision of constitution, or if any ordinary law takes away our constitutional right, then judiciary will definitely going to struck it down. You can definitely write down this statement. It's very essential for our learning. It's very essential for overall understanding of the topic. Please write. If any ordinary law break the constitutional provision, if any ordinary law breaks any constitutional provision or against constitutional values, or against constitutional values, then judiciary may be going to struck it down. Judiciary may be going to struck it down. And one more point that I want to write it over here. Ordinary law is executed by a government officer. Ordinary law is going to be executed by a government officer. वहाँ space नहीं है इसलिए ऊपर लिख रहा हूँ. Ordinary law is being well executed by a government officer, whereas constitutional law are protected by judiciary. It is protected by judiciary. And one of the most important example of constitutional law is fundamental right. Let's say right to equality. So student, any law any law that the government has created to promote the ideals of right to equality is going to be considered as fundamental, is going to be considered as the principle of constitutional law, and this constitutional law is going to be well protected by the judiciary itself. It is going to be get well protected by the judiciary, and it's the process which will make sure that the judiciary will always make sure that the purpose of constitutional law should always be there, because it establishes the relationship between the government and of course the state and its citizen itself. And ordinary law का क्या है भाई? Ordinary law को तो execute करते हैं government officer. अगर government officer अपनी power का misuse करेंगे और ऑर्डनरी लॉ को इंप्लीमेंट करने के नाम पे कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल लॉ का वायलेशन करेंगे, देन ऑर्डनरी लॉ आर ऑलवेज गोइंग टू गेट वायलेटेड, और एग्जीक्यूटिव ऑफिसर इज ऑलवेज गोइंग टू बी ब्रिंग ऑन टू द कॉरिडोर्स ऑफ जुडिशरी इटसेल्फ. So one basic difference between ordinary law and constitutional law is ordinary law is related to functioning, day-to-day functioning of the executive, whereas the constitutional law is related to relationship between the state and the citizens, primarily being associated with the fundamental rights. Been associated with fundamental rights and all. For example, right to equality का मैंने यहाँ पे रख दिया. अब मैं जरा इस चीज़ को देखता हूँ. For example, right to vote. Right to vote. Now, I'm not answering it right now, whether right to vote is a constitutional right or a legal right. This is something we'll be going to learn later on. But just look into the example, right to vote. Of course, right to vote is not a fundamental right. It is not a fundamental right because it cannot be availed to everyone. The primary condition is you need to be 18 years of age and you should not be in contravention to law. जेल वेल में नहीं होने चाहिए. नहीं तो अगर आप हो तो वहाँ पर आपको वोटिंग राइट नहीं मिलेगा. अगर आप कन्विक्टेड हो चुके हो तो फिर ऐसी सिचुएशन में वोटिंग राइट कैन बी कॉम्प्रोमाइज. तो चलो, वोटिंग राइट फंडामेंटल राइट नहीं है, बट लेट्स से मेरे पास एक वोटिंग राइट है, आई हैव अ वोटिंग राइट, बट सडनली टुमारो लेट्स से एग्जीक्यूटिव इज गोइंग टू क्रिएट अ लॉ, लेट्स से एग्जीक्यूटिव इज गोइंग टू क्रिएट अ लॉ अंडर विच let's say people from this region have not been allowed to vote. Now if people from this region has not been, this region, that region, anyone, if people from this region has not been allowed to vote and there is no proper reasonable argument given by the government why you are not been allowed to vote, then under this situation I will go to a court and I will say that, sir, your lordship, government has created one law. Under this law, they are abridging or taking away my constitutional right or my constitutional right of having voting power or voting exercise, because मैं 18 साल का हूँ, मैं वोट देने की पावर रखता हूँ, मेरा सारा प्रोसेस हो चुका है, आई एम नॉट इन कॉन्ट्रावेंशन टू एनी लॉ, मैं बिल्कुल एक पूरी लीगल अथॉरिटी रखता हूँ वोट करने के लिए, बट स्टिल आई हैव नॉट बीन अलाउड बाय द एग्जीक्यूटिव ऑफिसर टू वोट. इट इज बेसिकली इन कॉन्ट्रावेंशन to the spirit of constitutional law, which is right to equality. तो अगर आपको वोट देने से मना कर दिया जाएगा तो आप ये नहीं बोलोगे कि मेरा वोटिंग राइट छीन लिया गया, आप ये बोलोगे मेरा राइट टू इक्वालिटी छीन लिया गया. इफ दैट रीजन कैन बी अलाउड टू वोट, व्हाई नॉट माई रीजन कैन बी अलाउड टू वोट? सो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल लॉ, ordinary law, both intermingled with each other onto day-to-day functioning of the working of the executive itself. But there is a basic difference between the understanding. Ordinary law are those law by which various government institution will govern. अलग अलग इंस्टीट्यूशन है गवर्नमेंट की, एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन है, माइनिंग डिपार्टमेंट है, इलेक्ट्रिसिटी डिपार्टमेंट है, सबके अलग अलग लॉ बना के रखे हुए हैं, वो सब ऑर्डिनरी लॉ है. तो गवर्नमेंट की जितनी इंस्टीट्यूशन है सबके लिए स्पेसिफिक लॉ है, दे आर बेसिकली ऑर्डिनरी लॉ. और जो लॉ फंडामेंटल राइट से रिलेटेड है, बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर से रिलेटेड है, इक्वालिटी से रिलेटेड है, विच आर वेरी एसेंशियल, विच बिकॉज दे एस्टेब्लिश अ रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन द गवर्नमेंट और द स्टेट एंड द सिटीजन, दे आर कॉमनली नोन एज कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल लॉ. बट मैनी अ टाइम वी विटनेस दो सिचुएशन वेयर ऑर्डिनरी लॉ एंटर इन टू द टेरिटरी ऑफ constitutional law, and when ordinary law enter into the territory of constitutional law and disturb the purpose of constitution, then government will definitely going to struck down those ordinary law which actually violate with the spirit of constitution itself. For example, where is the Shreya Shinghal example? For example, this particular example, Shreya Shinghal. So in the Shreya Shinghal example, I have already used very appropriately that Article 19(1)(a), freedom of speech and expression, is basically a larger principle of constitutional law in our country. और ये एक पार्लियामेंट का कानून था, एक ऑर्डिनरी लॉ था, पार्लियामेंट का एक लॉ था, विच एक्चुअली इंटरफियर इनटू द लार्जर पर्पस ऑफ फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच एंड एक्सप्रेशन, एंड देयरफॉर सुप्रीम कोर्ट डिसाइडेड टू कंप्लीटली कैंसल इट, डिक्लेयर इट null and void, because in the name of ordinary execution of the section 66A of IT Act, the authorities are actually interfering into our constitutional law of having a freedom of speech and expression. पहली बात तो ये समझो, constitutional law कोई parliamentary law नहीं है. Constitutional law basically constitution का interpretation है. They are basically the interpretation of the constitution. They are basically the ideology of the constitution based upon which certain fundamental rights have been accorded to you. And ordinary laws are those laws which are for the proper day-to-day functioning of the government, day-to-day functioning of the government agencies. In the name of the day-to-day function, many a time we have witnessed situation where agencies are interfering into your constitutional rights. तो constitutional law कोई अलग से law नहीं होते हैं. Constitutional law are basically interpretation of the larger wisdom of the constitution itself. So this is again a very important topic. So our legal system has, for example, I've told you two type of law itself, which define the relationship between state and citizen, which define the powers of various state institution, how they are going to govern, and based upon which I have described you a difference between the ordinary law and constitutional law. Always remember the debate. Constitutional law कोई different law नहीं होते हैं. Constitutional law actually basically are the interpretation of the constitution where your rights are firmly protected because it is a relationship between a state and citizen. And sometimes, many a times in fact, in the name of execution of authorities, in the name of execution of ordinary law, constitutional law been violated. For example, bulldozer. अब आपका घर है, आपका जो घर है वो मान लेते हैं वो नक्शे के प्रोविजन में थोड़ा सा डिस्टर्बेंस आ गया है, and without giving you any opportunity, they've decided to completely bulldoze your home. And your home has been bulldozed, but at the same time, other 10 people home are being completely left as it is. So what you gonna do? You are going to definitely enter into, by taking the help of the judiciary. You ask in front of judges that your lordship, not appropriate time has been given it to me, and even if they have to bulldoze, why only my home has been targeted? In the name of municipal law, which is an ordinary law, in the name of municipal law, they are actually intruding into my right of living in a home, because as per the right to life, I also need to have a right to shelter. मुझे घर बनाने का अधिकार भी है, घर में रहने का अधिकार भी है, और right to shelter is very much a fundamental right under Article 21. It has been just taken away by a municipal official. A junior engineer rank officer is actually giving me a notice कि घर तोड़ दीजिए, otherwise हम ही अलग कर देंगे घर. So many a times we have witnessed situation that ordinary law, which is basically been executed by a government officer, they actually entered into the domain of the constitutional law, which is more or less related to the fundamental rights and its interpretation. So what exactly we required? We required respect for constitutional law, and based upon which constitutional law, ordinary law should be created. तो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल लॉ के लिए कोई अलग लॉ नहीं बनता है. कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल लॉ बेसिकली लार्जर अंडरस्टैंडिंग है, इंटरप्रिटेशन ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, वेयर फंडामेंटल राइट्स आर बीइंग गिवन अ ट्रूली डिफरेंट डायरेक्शन ऑल टुगेदर. सो आई हैव कवर्ड यूनिट नंबर 2. Let me show you where is the PDF file. This is the PDF file. Okay, so please follow it. Have we covered constitution as fundamental law? Let me mark it. Let me use marker over here. Let me use which marker? This marker. So have we gone through this one? Classification of constitution. You're comfortable with meaning of constitution. You're comfortable with meaning of constitution. You're comfortable with A.V. Dicey's rule of law. You're also comfortable with evolution of constitution, pre-modern one, early and middle age constitution, modern constitution, and of course significance and relevance of constitution, which I have gone through in my previous session. Now student, I have done with this topic. Now it's my responsibility to move towards the next unit. Now I'll be going to look into the next unit, that is unit number 1. So now my focus is going to be onto the unit number 1, basic elementary definition to start with. I still have time. I still have 5 to 10 minutes. I hope you people are not getting bored out of me, and let's look into this particular unit itself. So let me start unit number 1 now. Unit 1, basic. I always start with unit number 2 first, and then I put my focus onto the unit number 1. Basic elementary definition to start with. Some very elementary definition for Indian polity learning. I hope in our previous 2 sessions, you are now comfortable with the terminologies: constitution, constitutionalism, rule of law, ordinary law, constitutional law, and so many different domains that I've shared with you. In the same manner, let's look into some various elementary definition. So let's look into this definition. What do we mean by law? Of course, one understanding is now there in your mind. Sir, constitution is the fundamental law of the land, and based upon that fundamental law of the land, all other law are going to get their legitimacy. सारे लॉ जो हैं छोटी छोटी टहनियां हैं एक बड़े बरगद के वृक्ष कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के नीचे. ये तो समझ में आ गया है, बट थोड़ा सा लॉ को पढ़ते हैं स्टूडेंट, बिकॉज अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ द लॉ, अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ द नेचर ऑफ द लॉ इज इक्वली इंपॉर्टेंट टू अंडरस्टैंड द प्रिंसिपल ऑफ लॉ. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, मैं एक सेंटेंस लिखता हूं, ठीक है, मैं एक सेंटेंस बोलता हूं आपको, दैट कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन इज अ सब्सटेंटिव लॉ ऑफ अवर कंट्री. If I'm going to use this statement that constitution is a substantive law of our country. Now, if I'm going to use this statement, or if I'm going to write this statement, it need to make proper sense to you that why we associate constitution as the substantive law of our country, why we do not associate constitution to be more of a procedural law of our country. Constitution को substantive law क्यों कहते हैं, procedural law क्यों नहीं कहते हैं? तो ये ना थोड़े डिफरेंस पता होने चाहिए. सो लेट्स लुक इनटू वन बेसिक डेफिनेशन. सो हाउ वुड यू डिफाइन लॉ, स्टूडेंट? व्हाई डू वी नीड अ लॉ? फॉर एग्जांपल, वुड यू रादर लाइक टू लिव इन अ सोसाइटी विच इज हाईली डिसऑर्डरली, विच इज हार्डली हैविंग एनी लॉ? हाईली डिसऑर्डरली सोसाइटी, कोई भी किसी को मार रहा है, कोई भी किसी को उसके राइट्स छीन रहा है, एंड नो प्रॉपर ऑर्डर इज देयर. वुड यू लाइक टू लिव इन दैट पर्टिकुलर सोसाइटी? आंसर इज डेफिनेटली नो. वी वुड लाइक टू लिव इन अ सोसाइटी वेयर देयर इज अ प्रॉपर ऑर्डर, प्रॉपर सेट ऑफ गवर्नेंस, प्रॉपर रिस्पेक्ट फॉर रूल ऑफ लॉ. And in order to understand this particular point, we should look into a very famous word. What do we mean by law? So what do we mean by law, student? Law actually means a system of rules. A system of rules. A system of rules. Niyam, system of rules. 100 different type of rules and niyams actually converted into a law. So system of rule, and who are going to create those rules? If I'm going to create those rules as a private citizen, if you are going to create those rules as a private citizen, then there would be complete anarchy, because we are not having the authority ना. तो अगर मैं रूल बनाऊं, तुम रूल बनाओ, जिसके पास पावर ही नहीं है, तो हर कोई अपने अपने रूल बनाएगा, तो फिर रूल को इम्प्लीमेंट कैसे करोगे? सो व्हाट डू वी मीन बाय लॉ? Law is a system of rule that need to be enforced by society and government. That need to be implemented by society and government. Society, government, state, institution, all are correlative with each other. There is a point why I am writing the word society. Why am I writing the word society? I will explain it to you later on. But one thing is very important. Law is a system of rule that need to be implemented by society, by government. But the larger purpose is, why do we need a law? Of course, it's a system of rules. Of course, it's a system of rules that will make sure that we are going to live in an orderly manner, in a proper aligned manner. But why do we need a law? A very larger question. Why do we need the wisdom of law? So student, we need the law. We need a system of rule that need to be implemented by society and government to regulate, control karna, regulate karna. Because we all know Constitution is all about promoting the doctrine of limited government. It cannot be doctrine of unlimited government. It cannot be doctrine of unreasonable government. It need to be reasonability, but reasonability also means they need to use their power of a limitation. After all, we have to promote the idea of government, and government should have been a limited government. They need to be work within the parameters or within the perifacy of their power. तो पावर जहां तक है वहां तक तो यूज करें भाई, कुछ ना कुछ तो पावर दी जाएगी ना, क्योंकि कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन का मतलब ये नहीं है कि देयर शुड बी नो पावर, देयर शुड बी पावर बट इट शुड नॉट बी एब्सोल्यूट पावर. But within the power, the larger purpose is to regulate. Regulate what? The purpose of law is to create a system of rule that need to implement by society, that need to be implemented by government in order to regulate. And answer is why we need to regulate? Because it's very essential to regulate behavior. For example, you are there in a point, you are there in a particular point on a traffic, and there is a police official standing over there. In fact, let's say police official on all four sides of the road. So this side, that side, this side, that side. So on every particular point, there is a police official. Once there is going to be a police official, which means state is there, which means power authority is there. And now if state is there, power authority is there, everything is going to be in a proper orderly manner. So why do we need a law? We need a law to regulate. We need a law to regulate our behavior. Because if we are not going to have a law, we'll be going to have a unscrupulous behavior. अगर कोई लॉ ही नहीं रहेगा तो हमारा बिहेवियर भी वैसा ही होगा जैसे 50,000 साल पहले या 5,000 साल पहले होता था. दैट माइट इज राइट, जिसके पास पावर है वही राइट हो जाएगा. No, it should not be in this manner. Modern day countries are going to be governed by rule of law. Rule of law means there should be a system of rule that should be implemented by a society and government to regulate behavior. To regulate behavior, to regulate or maintain public order. To regulate behavior, to regulate or maintain public order, and at the same time to resolve dispute. Why do we need a law? We need a law to resolve dispute. Dispute between whom? Dispute between state and citizen. Dispute between different citizens. दो लोगों के बीच में या state और citizens के बीच में. So we need to have resolution of dispute as well. And last but not the least, we need to protect right as well. And rights can only be protected when we are going to have a law, let's say a constitutional law. So everything has been written by me in slightly in haphazard manner. कहीं का कहीं लिख दिया है, but learning is on the right track. So law can be defined as a system of rules that need to be implemented by government to regulate our behavior, to have a complete public order, to resolve dispute, to protect rights. And the larger purpose of law as a student is to have a uniformity in our behavior. Because without having law, we are not going to be uniform. We are going to be haywire. मैं कुछ कर रहा हूँ, आप कुछ कर रहे हैं, कोई कुछ और कर रहा है, और एक दूसरे के साथ ना coordination होगा, ना cooperation होगा, and we cannot become a very orderly function society. After all, what do we mean by civil war? Civil war are those situations, civil war are those conditions where law and order being completely go for a toss. Only few selective people are having their own territory and they are having their own order, they are having their own rule. And therefore, I've used the word, very sincere word, we need to have a rule of law, we need not to have a rule of men. So, पहली definition है student, law की. लॉ एक रूल तैयार करता है, हमारे बिहेवियर को रेगुलेट करता है, एंड इट ऑल्सो प्रोटेक्ट अवर राइट, इट ऑल्सो रिजॉल्व द डिस्प्यूट अमंग अस. एंड ऑन दैट नोट, लेट लुक इनटू डिवीजन ऑफ लॉ. सो देयर आर टू टाइप्स ऑफ लॉ इन जनरल. Although there are many essential definition of law, but in general, law can be divided into two different branches. Number one, descriptive law. Please write all these things. You are in a process of understanding Indian Constitution, and Indian Constitution does not mean कि आज से preamble रटना चालू कर दिया. ये सारे words जो आप सीख रहे हो, they are going to have its a huge amount of utility when you are going to learn the principles from preamble itself. preamble and then later on proceeding to other part of the constitution. So law are of two type, descriptive, which are commonly known as scientific law, and of course other than descriptive, it is all about man-made law, which is prescriptive, prescribed. It is also known as stipulative. So what is descriptive law? Descriptive law are science-based law, which you cannot argue. Of course, at certain period of time, we used to argue even scientific law, but nowadays, evidences are there, empirical evidences are there. We cannot argue it. Things will move in that fashion itself. दिन है, दिन के बाद रात होगी, रात के बाद सुबह होगी, अर्थ अपना काम करेगा, अर्थ से रिलेटेड साइंटिफिक इश्यूज अपने काम करेंगे, ग्रेविटेशन अपना काम करेगा. All these things which are being related to the science are actually having a descriptive law. So descriptive law are basically those laws which are related to nature, which are related to functioning of the nature. For example, gravitational law. So has somebody created gravitational law? Answer is no. Few people have discovered the reality of gravitational law. Einstein played a very important role because he's been important person in terms of the understanding of the generation of gravitation. And because I hope you are aware about the fact that Einstein was responsible for the theory of gravitational waves, whereas Newton was responsible for the understanding of gravitational force. So whether gravitational force or whether gravitational waves, are these two things being created on its own, or are these two things being created by some individual? Answer is no. It is not been created by individual. It is basically a natural process, and it's the natural process which has been going on since billions of years. So one type of law is the descriptive law, scientific law. अब इसमें तो कुछ कर नहीं सकते scientific law में. So what do we mean by different type of law? Other than descriptive law, we have the prescriptive law. Prescriptive law are those law which are the man-made law. These are the law being created by man. They are known as man-made law. They are known as man-made law or man-made law, and man-made law, but at the same time enforced by certain sanction, enforced by certain authority, which means some institutions are creating law, they are implementing those law, and if you are not following those law, you will be punished for it. So man-made law and enforced by authority, enforced by authority with sanctions power. Enforced by authority with sanctions. Enforced by authority with sanction means authority implement करेगी, मानोगे नहीं तो सजा भी मिलेगी. So enforced by authority with punishment power. Now student, how do prescriptive law got its nomenclature? How do prescriptive law been created? Now please understand, even constitution is basically a brainchild of men. It is not the brainchild of nature, it is the brainchild of men. But how the word constitution got its nomenclature, how the word constitution got its evolution, I've already shared with you. Constitution also is a type of prescriptive law. It has been created by a man, but been created by a man for its own larger purpose, for its own larger benefit. तो prescriptive law, stipulative law, man-made law होते हैं, और ये जो man-made law होते हैं student, they are basically been created not in one day process, it's the process that has been going on for hundreds of years. So कैसे बनते हैं prescriptive law? ये तो हम बना नहीं सकते. Can we create the gravitational law? No. Are you responsible for creation of gravitational law? No. Is humanity responsible for creation of gravitational law? No. It's the natural process that we are observing it. But there are certain type of law which are man-made law. They are enforced by authority with sanctions. They are man-made law. So how prescriptive laws are being made? Prescriptive law are being made based upon customs, based upon traditions, based upon norms. ये repeat हो रहा है, पहले भी पढ़ा चुका हूँ इसको. They are based on custom. These are based on tradition. These are based on norms. These are based on moral conscience, morality, which can be correct, which can be incorrect. That's a truly different story. अरे भाई लॉ गलत और सही हो सकता है क्योंकि वो डिपेंड करता है कि मोरालिटी क्या है सोसाइटी की. मोरालिटी जो पहले गलत थी आज सही मानी जाती, आज जो सही मानी जाती हो सकता है अब आगे चल के गलत मानी जाए. सो प्रिस्क्रिप्टिव लॉ और मैन मेड लॉ, they are being enforced by authority with sanctions. They are being created with the larger ideology of custom, tradition, norms, moral conscience, and of course public opinion. And of course public opinion. That's how law being created. And I need not to explain you, as opinion get changed over a period of time, then definitely laws are also going to get changed. As custom will change, tradition will change, conscience will change, norms will change, as public opinion will change, definitely we'll be going to have new law or new purpose. For example, at certain period of time, sati was considered to be morally upright. But later on, based upon the wisdom or at that particular period of time, the Britishers decided to have the abolition of sati, and our society collectively decided to have the abolition of sati. So as morality changes, as moral conscience changes, the stipulative law, prescriptive law, constitutional law is also going to be different over a period of time. It is not going to be stagnated, वो समय के साथ change होता रहेगा. और अंत में, लास्ट में एक बड़ा अच्छा स्टेटमेंट एरिस्टोटल कहते हैं, these are all the important socio-political philosophy that's very essential for you to learn. Aristotle says, society रहने लायक तभी होती है, a society should be governed not by emotions. Society should be governed not by emotions. Society should be governed by three things. Number one, in society there should be justice, there should be equality, and there should be law. And what type of law? Prescriptive law, based upon all these things. A society is livable not because of certain emotions, but because of the principle of justice, principle of equality, principle of law. And if any society is following the principle of justice and equality and having all type of law which are being appropriate as per the current tradition, then that society is livable, that society is considered to be more appropriate. So this was the wisdom being given by Aristotle. Please understand one very important point over here, student. Let me stop my session on this note. Not too many teachers and not too many students put their concentration on exact definition of these words. What do we mean by right? अब किसी ने पूछ लिया कि यार फंडामेंटल राइट नेगेटिव राइट होता है या फंडामेंटल राइट को नेगेटिव राइट माना जाना चाहिए, तब फिर वहाँ बैफल नहीं होना चाहिए. वी नीड नॉट टू बी बैफल्ड ओवर देयर दैट व्हाई समबडी इज सेइंग फंडामेंटल राइट टू बी लार्जली अ नेगेटिव राइट. So all these type of definition need to be clear. Unfortunately, people don't do this elementary definition. लोग ये पढ़ते नहीं है, ये नहीं पढ़ते, उसके बाद concept of ideology नहीं पढ़ते. They don't look into the concept of ideology. These all different ideology plays a very vital role in understanding of the constitution. They don't pay the part of focus of their preparation in the evolution of constitution, and of course understanding different norms which are being associated with constitutionalism. और ये थोड़ा बहुत पढ़ते हैं कि कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन बना कैसे, ये पढ़ते हैं सेलियंट फीचर ऑफ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन क्या है, लेकिन स्टार्ट यहीं से करते हैं. They actually start their journey from the preamble of the constitution itself. My humble request to each and every one of you is, our initial few classes, maybe 8 or 9 classes, would be truly dedicated towards building the initial concepts which are related to the first 4 unit. And once we are comfortable with the first 4 unit, so many repetitive words are going to be there in the page number, unit number 5 itself, which is understanding from the preamble. और फिर यहाँ से हमारी journey आसान हो जाएगी. Repeat होने लगेंगे words. For example, when you are going to read the preamble, the word liberty is going to be there, and different dimension related to liberty is already going to get covered maybe tomorrow or day after tomorrow classes. So it's very essential, first of all, to put your primary focus onto the first 4 unit, and after the first 4 unit, we should put our primary focus on unit number 5. On that note, student, I already shared with you 2 types of law in general. Descriptive law, जिसका कुछ कर नहीं सकते, which is scientific, and of course the prescriptive law, जिसका बहुत कुछ कर सकते हैं. And over a period of time, prescriptive law been going through many changes. This is something we'll be going to learn in my next session itself. So that's it for today's session. I'll see you in my next class.